Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from, also what time is it. The first scream wasn't loud, it wasn't even human. It was a gurgling, throaty croak that echoed from the mouth of the woods behind the old Bellamy house, where the trees grew too close together and the wind never blew right. The kind of sound that wraps around your spine like a cold hand and stays there long after it's gone. Nobody was supposed to be there. Not anymore. Not since the Bellamy family disappeared 37 years ago, all at once, on a summer morning just like this one. People say the house just swallowed them. But what really happened? That's what Jonah wanted to find out. He was the kind of man who looked danger in the eye and demanded it blink first. A documentary filmmaker known for crawling through crypts in Chernobyl, for spending nights in derelict prisons, chasing stories where others ran. But this one felt different, and he knew it the moment the envelope arrived. No return address, no stamp, just his name. Inside a single photograph, it showed the Bellamy house, half hidden behind branches, its windows black, like eye sockets in a skull. There was a shadow in the doorway, humanoid, twisted, too long to be a trick of the light, and scribbled across the bottom in shaky handwriting, "It's awake again. They're waiting." He should have thrown it away. Instead, he packed his gear, told no one where he was going, and drove 8 hours to an empty part of upstate New York, where even the GPS gave up. The town was called Marrow Creek, population forgotten. There were no welcoming signs, no gas stations, just a diner with windows smeared with years of grime and a single blinking neon letter EAT. The locals watched him as he entered, eyes heavy with warning, the kind of stares that said they knew exactly where he was going, and they wouldn't follow him even if you paid them in gold. Jonah asked the waitress, her name tag said Marge, how to get to the Bellamy place. She didn't answer, just looked past him to a man in the back, who stood and limped over, one leg dragged behind the other like a forgotten limb. "You here to poke at the house?" he asked. His voice rasped like dry leaves on pavement. Jonah didn't lie. "I'm filming, documenting the legend, maybe shedding some truth." The man laughed, but there was no humor in it. Truth don't live there anymore. Did it ever? Jonah shot back. The man looked at him with something like pity. It did. Once. But that house that remembers. Jonah left with more questions than answers. The man's parting words echoed in his head as the trees began to close in around the dirt road. "Don't go past the fence after sundown. It don't like the dark." He found the house exactly where the photograph showed it. Alone. Silent. Its roof sagged in the middle. Shingles missing like teeth. The porch creaked under his weight, and the air smelled of mildew and something older. Something metallic, like blood left too long in water. As he stepped through the front door, it swung open without resistance. That should have been his first warning. The floorboards groaned underfoot. Dust clung to the air. But everything was untouched. The furniture sat where it had been left, plates on the table. A book still open on the armrest of a moth-eaten chair. It was as if the family had stepped out for a moment, intending to come right back. But no one ever did. Jonah filmed everything. The camera shook only slightly in his hands. He spoke into the microphone with his usual calm, but inside, something gnawed at him. A low thrum, like a heartbeat not his own. Upstairs, he found the bedrooms. Children's toys still on the floor. A mirror shattered in the master suite, though there was no sign of impact. Just a single word scratched into the cracked glass, "Blado." In the basement, the air was colder, thick, almost wet. The stairs whined with each step, and halfway down, the light on his camera flickered. He tapped it, and it died completely. When he reached the bottom, he paused. There was a smell there, stronger than rot. It was the scent of something trapped. Not animal, not quite human. And beneath it all, something subtle but unmistakable: lavender. He swept the flashlight across the room. Concrete walls, old tools, a rusted freezer in the corner, but no signs of life. Until something moved. Just a flicker, on the edge of the light. A shadow pulling back into the corner like it had been caught watching. Jonah froze. Raised the camera. Nothing there now. "Hello," he called, cursing how weak his voice sounded. Silence. He took a cautious step forward. Then another. He reached the freezer, touched the lid. Ice cold. He hadn't heard any humming from it, but it vibrated softly under his fingers, like it had its own heartbeat. He opened it. Inside was only dirt. That didn't make sense. It was packed to the top with moist black soil. Nothing else. But just as he leaned in closer, the dirt shifted. Moved. A small pale hand pushed through it. Jonah stumbled backward, his camera crashing to the floor. The hand was followed by another, and then a face, small, childlike, but warped, lips sewn shut, eyes sealed with thread. It reached for him without sight, mouth trembling behind the stitches. And then, with an awful squelching sound, it sank back into the soil, and the lid snapped shut on its own. Jonah ran. He burst out of the basement, panting, sweating. Upstairs, the air was thicker now. Every shadow felt like it was watching. He grabbed his bag, made for the door. It was closed. He hadn't closed it. Worse, when he turned the knob, it didn't budge. He kicked it, slammed his shoulder against it. Nothing. The windows were next, nailed shut from the inside. He hadn't noticed before. They were sealed so cleanly. You'd think they were built that way. That's when he heard the breathing. It was close. Just behind him. But when he turned, there was no one there. No one, but the furniture had moved. The table was a few inches closer to the wall. The armchair pointed toward the stairs now, and the book on the armrest. It was closed. He hadn't touched it. His hands trembled as he picked up the camera. It still worked. Miraculously. The screen blinked to life, and he replayed the last few minutes. The footage showed him walking into the basement, talking, reaching the freezer, opening it, but the freezer was empty. No soil, no hands, no child. Instead, he saw himself staring into it, expression blank, for over a minute. Then he whispered something, over and over. "Help me," his own voice, low and monotone. "Help me, help me." He had no memory of saying it. Suddenly, upstairs, the sound of footsteps. Quick. Scattered, like something crawling. He pointed the camera toward the stairs, inching back. "Who's there?" The footsteps stopped. Then, a whisper. "You saw her." The voice was thin, raspy, male, not a child. "She's hungry." Jonah held his breath. Every instinct screamed at him to get out, to break a window if he had to run. But something else, some deeper, more terrifying force, kept him rooted. "I want to help," he said, trying to sound calm. "What is this place?" Another whisper. She never left. Then silence. Jonah moved fast. He ran to the kitchen, found a drawer of rusted utensils, a fork, a butter knife, a corkscrew. He jammed the knife into the window frame, prying. It wouldn't budge. But the fork scratched at the wood, dug in. He kept at it, sweat pouring, breath ragged, until finally, the nails loosened. He pulled at the window, lifting it with every bit of strength, and it opened. Cold air rushed in. Night had fallen. He didn't remember it getting dark. Jonah scrambled out, falling into the dirt. The air outside was no better. The woods were darker than they should have been. No moon. No stars. He didn't stop. Didn't look back. His car was still where he left it. Door open. Keys inside. He drove. Didn't stop until the diner reappeared in the headlights. He burst in, pale, shaking, camera clutched in one hand. Marge looked up from the counter. "You went in," she said. He nodded. Couldn't speak. The man from before was already standing, as if he'd been waiting. "She showed herself to you, didn't she?" Jonah nodded again. The man's face fell. "She's marked you." "What does that mean?" Jonah rasped. The man didn't answer. He only said, "She'll follow now. The house never lets go." Then, the camera in Jonah's hand beeped. Low battery. He turned the screen toward them. The last frame of the footage, the very last, showed something standing behind him. A girl, pale, sewn shut, smiling through the blood, and on the wall behind her, something new had been carved in thick, dark letters, E-B-R-O-U-H-T hair O-U-T. The diner went cold, and not from the autumn air creeping through the door Jonah had left swinging on its hinges. No, this chill came from something deeper, something that settled into the bones of the room and made the lights hum just a little louder, the shadows lean just a little longer. The camera screen still glowed in Jonah's trembling hands, showing that impossible image, the girl behind him. The one with lips sewn shut and a smile like she knew something he didn't. Jonah stared at it, willing it to be some kind of trick. A glitch, something he could explain away as camera distortion or bad lighting. But there was no denying the thick, tar-like words behind her, carved into the wall that, he swore, had been clean when he left the house. E-B-R-O-G-H-T hair O-U-T. Marge stepped back, the edge of her tray knocking over a cup of coffee that shattered against the floor. She didn't move to clean it. Her hands covered her mouth, and she looked at Jonah as if seeing him for the first time. Like he wasn't just a man anymore, but something else. Something dangerous. Touched. The old man, still standing, reached out and snapped the camera shut with a suddenness that made Jonah flinch. He took the device from Jonah's hands with no resistance. It was as if Jonah had already decided it wasn't his anymore, as if it belonged to whatever had followed him out of that place. "You don't keep a door open for her," the man said, his voice lower now. Not angry. Just tired. "You shut it. Lock it. Seal it in." "But you," he turned the camera over in his hands like it was something toxic. "You brought her out." Jonah tried to find his voice, tried to stitch his panic into words. I didn't mean to. I just went in. I recorded. That's all." "That's enough," Marge said from across the room, eyes wide. "It always is." The old man handed the camera back, not looking Jonah in the eye. "Whatever you do, don't watch it again. Don't play that footage, not unless you want her closer. That image, it's a tether now. A way through." Jonah took the camera like it was loaded. "What is she?" The man sighed, sat down, and pulled something from his coat. A flask. He didn't offer any. Just drank. Then he said, "There was a girl." "That part's true. The Bellamys had a daughter. Evelyn. Sweet little thing. 6 years old when they vanished. But she wasn't born right." Marge turned away, pretending to clean the counter. The man continued. "Wasn't sick, exactly. But strange. Spoke to things that weren't there. Drew pictures of doors in places they didn't exist. Said they came to her at night. Whispered to her. Told her secrets no child should know." Jonah leaned in, the fear settling behind his ribs. "The family disappeared because of her." The man nodded. "She opened something. Or was something. No one really knows. But that house, it changed after. People heard things. Saw lights through boarded windows. Folks who went in either didn't come out or weren't the same when they did. And now," Marge muttered from behind the counter, "you've gone and carried her out like a passenger." Jonah sat down hard, the weight of it pressing into him. He didn't believe in curses. Not really. He believed in trauma, psychology, the things people did to each other. But there was no rational explanation for what he saw in that freezer. Or how that girl ended up behind him. Or why the camera caught something his own eyes never did. "She touched you?" the man said. "That mark, it's not on your skin. It's deeper. She'll show up more now. Dreams first, then mirrors. Then," he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Jonah left the diner in a daze. The night colder than before. His breath misted in front of him as he opened the car door, slid into the driver's seat, and sat there for a long time. He didn't want to go to a hotel. Didn't want to be alone, but the thought of staying in that town was worse. The silence here wasn't normal. It pressed in from every direction. The kind of silence that muffled screams. He drove until the road widened, until he found a motel with a vacancy sign half lit and buzzing. The clerk didn't ask questions, just slid him a key and pointed to a door at the far end. Room 9. Inside, it was the kind of place that hadn't changed since the 80s. Floral curtains, scratchy bed sheets, a TV that required a hard thump to turn on. Jonah sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out the camera. He shouldn't have. He knew it, but he had to see it again. Had to know if it was real, or if his brain had filled in the blanks. Maybe the stress had twisted something inside him. He hit play. The screen lit up, his footsteps through the house. His voice, calm at first, narrating what he saw, the slow descent into the basement, the freezer. Then blankness, static, and then her, clearer this time, her stitched mouth. Her hands, long and thin, fingers twitching. Her head tilted at an impossible angle, as if listening for something that wasn't sound. And those words, just behind her, not carved now but moving, letters squirming like worms across the wall, He Braughtarout. The screen flickered, froze, and then her eyes snapped open. Jonah dropped the camera. The screen went black. He didn't sleep. Not really. He dozed sometime before dawn, every time jerking awake just before something cold touched him in the dream. In one of them, he stood in the hallway of the Bellamy house, but the hallway stretched for miles. Doors lined both sides, dozens of them, all slightly ajar. Behind each, whispers, lauder. Something dragging itself closer. In another, he woke up to find her standing at the foot of his motel bed, mouth dripping something black, eyes still sewn shut. By morning, Jonah looked like a man 10 years older. His hands shook as he brushed his teeth. The mirror fogged, and for a second, just a second, he saw a second reflection behind him. But when he turned, the room was empty. His phone had no signal. The clerk was gone. The lobby was locked. Jonah packed his bag, left the key on the desk, and got in the car without looking back. He drove. Hours. No music. Just the rhythmic sound of tires on asphalt, and the gnawing thought that something was in the back seat, just out of view. He didn't see it. Not then. But that night, in the next town over, he set the camera on the nightstand and went to shower. When he came out, the camera was on. Recording. It faced the bed. And written in steam on the bathroom mirror were 3 words, "She is hungry." Jonah didn't remember breathing. Not until his knees hit the tile, and the air caught in his lungs like ice water. He stared at those words, "She is hungry," as if they'd appeared not on the mirror, but inside his own head. The steam was already fading, curling off the edges of the message, but it didn't matter. The words were burned in. He stumbled back into the motel room. Towel clutched around his waist, heart jackhammering against his ribs. The camera's red light blinked. It had been recording for nearly 20 minutes. Jonah approached slowly, as if it might bite. The lens faced the bed exactly, centered and steady. He hadn't left it like that. He was sure of it. His hands trembled as he stopped the recording and tapped the playback. At first, nothing, just the room. The ugly bedspread. The lamp with the crooked shade. A single fly circling under the ceiling fan. But 8 minutes in, the screen dimmed. The lights didn't flicker in the room itself, just in the footage, like the camera saw something reality wouldn't admit. Then, movement. Behind the bed, a dark smudge slid across the floor like shadow made liquid. It stopped at the edge of the mattress and rose. Not in a human way. Not standing, just lifting, like smoke in reverse, the shape of a girl, long limbs. Head tilted too far to the left. Her mouth still sealed shut, but her chest moved as if she were breathing. Fast, desperate. She crouched beside the bed and tilted her head toward the camera, and smiled. Jonah dropped the camera again. This time, it cracked. A web of shattered glass bloomed across the screen, but the image still played, barely visible through the fractured surface. He had to get out. He dressed in seconds, shoved his things into his bag without checking what made it in, and bolted out the door. The motel parking lot was empty. No other cars, no sounds, Even the birds were gone. He didn't look at the mirror again. Couldn't. As he pulled out of the lot, gravel spitting under his tires, he forced himself to keep his eyes on the road. The rearview mirror stayed tilted down, just enough to keep the back seat out of sight. The sun was rising, pale, hesitant, like it didn't want to witness whatever followed him. Jonah drove until the gas gauge hit red and his eyelids started to twitch. A rest stop appeared like a mirage. A single pump, a rusted vending machine, and a boarded-up store with a payphone bolted to the wall. He hadn't seen a payphone in years. He picked up the receiver and pressed it to his ear. A dial tone, surprisingly. He didn't know who he was calling until his fingers finished dialing. His sister answered on the second ring. Jonah. Hearing her voice cracked something inside him. Emma, he whispered. Hi, something's wrong. What happened? I went to a house. In Marrow Creek. The Bellamy place. A pause. Why would you do that? You know it. Yeah. People used to talk about it online. Creepy stories. Urban legends. But I didn't think. She followed me, he said. Something came out of there, and now it's following me. Another pause. Then Emma's voice, lower now. Jonah, where are you? I don't know. Somewhere off Route 9. A rest stop. I can't go home. I don't want to bring it to you. Listen to me, she said, sharper now. You need help. Not a hotel. Not a road trip. You need someone who understands this. You think I'm crazy. I think you saw something you shouldn't have. And if it's what I think it is, we need to talk to someone. There's a guy. He used to be on this forum I followed years ago. Paranormal stuff. He said he survived something like what you're describing. Jonah clutched the receiver tighter. You trust him? I trust that he's the only one I know who might have answers. His name's Walter Crows. He lives in Maine now. Last I checked, near a town called Ashmill. Jonah jotted it down with shaking hands. Okay. Promise me something, she said. Don't film anything else. Don't talk to her. And for God's sake, don't feed her. That last sentence made him stop. What do you mean, feed her? But Emma had already hung up. The payphone clicked softly. A dead line. Jonah leaned against the wall, mind reeling. The crackling plastic of the phone dug into his skin. Something rustled behind the building. A scraping sound, slow and deliberate. He didn't wait to see what made it. He got back in the car and headed north. The road to Ashmill was long and wound through towns that looked like they were asleep on their feet. Gas stations with pumps that hadn't worked in a decade. Diners with flickering signs that blinked out when you passed. Jonah stopped only once for gas, using cash to avoid questions. Every time he blinked, he saw her. Evelyn. That was her name, wasn't it? The girl in the house. The thing in the freezer. The shadow beside the bed. He didn't sleep that night, even after reaching Ashmill. The town was little more than a crossroads. One streetlight. A post office. A church that looked like it hadn't seen a congregation in years. He found Walter Crows in a run-down farmhouse 10 minutes outside town, surrounded by scarecrows that looked more like warnings than decorations. Walter was a man carved out of hard years. Deep lines around his mouth. Beard gray and unkempt, eyes sharp despite the bags under them. He opened the door before Jonah could knock. You've got something clinging to you, you said. Jonah blinked. You see it. I don't need to. I smell it. Walter let him in, didn't ask for names. Just pointed to a worn-out armchair and poured them both black coffee strong enough to melt steel. The inside of the house was cluttered with books. Bones, jars of things Jonah didn't want to recognize. Symbols etched into the woodwork. Salt poured in thick lines across every threshold. She's old, Walter said. Older than that house. Older than Marrow Creek. The Bellamys built over something that should have stayed buried. She's not a ghost. Not exactly. Closer to a parasite. Jonah stared at him. What does she want? Company, Walter said. Hunger. Worship. She wants to be seen. The more you look, the stronger she gets. You recorded her. You fed her. Jonah's mouth went dry. How do I stop it? Walter looked at him long and hard. You don't? Not easily. But if you're willing, we can try. Try what? To put her back. Jonah nodded. Then, from the hallway behind Walter, something moved. A soft giggle, and a voice, small, dry, and wrong, whispered, "You brought me here." The sound of that voice froze Jonah in place, like someone had grabbed the base of his spine and twisted. It wasn't loud, just a breathy whisper. But it curled in the room like smoke, sliding into every crack in the walls, every pause in the conversation. And the way she said it. You brought me here, not accusatory. Grateful. That was worse. Walter stood, the old floorboards creaking under his boots. He moved slowly, as if too fast a step might disturb something watching from the shadows. Jonah followed his gaze to the hallway. There was nothing there. No child. No shape. Just a narrow corridor lit by a single bulb that swayed gently, though there was no breeze. She shouldn't be this fast, Walter muttered. You must have opened something wider than I thought. I didn't mean to, Jonah said, voice cracking. They never do. Walter didn't blink as he reached under the couch and pulled out a long object wrapped in cloth. He laid it on the table and carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a strange kind of dagger. Not silver, not steel. The blade looked like obsidian, but smoother, almost fluid, and carved with symbols Jonah didn't recognize. The handle was wrapped in black leather, worn with time and use. This isn't to kill her, Walter said. You can't kill what isn't alive the way we are. This is to sever. Cut the bond between you. But it's not permanent. Jonah leaned forward. So what is permanent? Burying her again. The old way. The only way. But for that, you need to go back to the house. Jonah recoiled. You can't be serious. She's not here yet. Not fully. She's bleeding through, bit by bit. But the root of her power is still there. Where she was first bound. You want to stop this. You go back to where it started. The thought made Jonah's skin crawl. The Bellamy house. The basement. The freezer filled with dirt. That stitched face peeking out from the soil like a flower blooming in rot. He remembered how it had called to him. Not with words, but with pull. A sense of falling inward, like the walls themselves wanted to fold around him. And now she was here, or close to it, whispering in Walter's hallway like she'd always belonged. Walter handed him the dagger. It was heavier than it looked, cold to the touch. Don't draw blood with it, unless you mean to. Jonah's hand closed around the handle. Why me? Why now? Walter shrugged. Sometimes these things pick. Sometimes they wake up when the right kind of person comes knocking. You recorded her. That opened the door. Jonah's jaw tightened. So I go back. You'll need more than that. Walter reached into the drawer and pulled out a small satchel of black cloth. Take this. Salt, ash, bone dust. Don't break the circle once you make it. Don't let her talk to you. And whatever you do, he leaned in, face serious. Don't eat anything. Not from the house. Not from her. Jonah's brow furrowed. Why would I? Walter cut him off. She feeds off consent. Invitation, you take her in. Food, blood, name, and she stays. Forever. That night Jonah didn't sleep. Not even with Walter's sigils painted on the guest room walls and the strange iron charms hanging from the windows. He lay in the narrow bed, eyes wide, watching the shadows shift across the ceiling. At one point, he thought he heard humming. A child's lullaby. So soft it might have been imagined. But then it stopped too abruptly to be just his mind. He sat up, gripped the dagger under his pillow, and stared at the door until morning. By sunrise, the decision was made. He was going back. The road to Marrow Creek felt longer this time. Like the world was stretching to keep him from it. Jonah's tires groaned against the cracked asphalt, and every few miles he thought he saw something in the trees. Pale, fleeting shapes that vanished when looked at directly. The dagger sat beside him, wrapped again. The satchel of bone dust lay in the passenger seat, like a silent warning. When the trees parted and the house came into view, his breath hitched. It looked worse now. even more warped. The roof slumped as if trying to collapse inward. The windows were darker than he remembered. The air buzzed with that same wrongness, like the atmosphere had been turned inside out. And as he stepped onto the porch, the wood beneath his boots felt soft, like breathing flesh. He didn't knock. He stepped inside, flashlight in one hand, dagger sheathed at his side. The interior hadn't changed much, at least not in the way walls and furniture change. But the air, it was heavier, moist, and the smell was stronger now. Soil, rot, lavender. He moved slowly, placing the salt line behind him with every step. When he reached the basement door, it was already open. That hadn't been the case before. Jonah paused at the top of the stairs. "I know you're here." No answer. He descended. The basement was exactly as it had been. The freezer still in the corner, the light bulb flickering. But something was wrong. The floor was damp. His boots squelched slightly with every step, and the freezer lid was ajar. Not open, not inviting, just waiting. Jonah circled the room and began setting the circle. Salt, ash, bone dust. He whispered the words Walter had written down. Words that sounded like they weren't meant for human tongues. Words that cracked in his throat and bled out like smoke. As he closed the circle, the freezer slammed shut behind him. He didn't jump. He turned slowly, and there she was, standing just outside the circle. Not a child, not anymore. Her limbs were too long, her face too narrow, and her eyes, oh God, her eyes, were open now. Not stitched, but split like fruit gone rotten. They dripped something black, thick as tar. Her mouth twitched, still sewn. But her voice filled the room, pressing against his ears from the inside. "You came back." Jonah gripped the dagger. "You're going back in." She tilted her head. "Why would I? You brought me here. You let me out. I like it better here." He stepped forward, staying within the circle. "You don't belong in this world." She smiled behind the thread. "And neither do you anymore." Suddenly, the basement twisted. The walls breathed. The floor rolled like waves underfoot. Jonah stumbled but held the line. The salt shimmered. The ash danced. Her smile faded. "You're trying to bind me," she hissed. "You think words will hold me?" "No," Jonah whispered. "But your name might." That stopped her. He took a deep breath. "Evelyn Bellamy." The shadows recoiled. Her form spasmed, flickered like static. Her voice rose, cracked with fury and something else. Fear. "No. Yes." He stepped into the center of the circle and drew the blade. The words Walter gave him spilled from his mouth, rough and dry like bark. As he spoke, the floor opened beneath the freezer, a pit of dirt and bones and roots, writhing like worms, curling toward Evelyn's feet. She screamed without sound. Jonah raised the dagger, and the light shattered. Darkness swallowed the room. Then a voice, clear, human, his mother's voice, whispered from just outside the circle. "Jonah, why are you hurting her?" He froze. It was impossible. He hadn't heard that voice since her funeral. But it spoke again. "She's just a child, Jonah. She's scared." "Don't do this." He trembled, took one step back, the dagger lowered. Then he heard something behind the voice. Laughter, twisting, cruel. He raised the blade again and plunged it down. The room exploded in noise and silence and screams that never stopped. Light burst from the circle, carving symbols into the air. The freezer split open. Roots curled inward, dragging her back, limb by limb, twitching and clawing and screeching. She didn't beg. She only stared at him and smiled. As she sank into the pit, the house breathed out. The air lightened. The shadows lifted, and the basement was still. Jonah collapsed to his knees, the dagger steaming in his hand. He'd done it. But as he turned to leave, something crunched under his boot. A single tooth. Still warm, still twitching, and carved into the wall, where the salt line had burned away, were new words. "She tasted you." The drive back from the Bellamy house felt like traveling through someone else's dream. The kind where everything looked familiar on the surface, but nothing felt right. Trees leaned closer to the road than they had before. The wind whispered in a language Jonah didn't recognize, though part of him wanted to answer. His hands shook on the wheel, and he couldn't stop glancing at the rearview mirror. Even though he ducked, taped a napkin over it hours ago, he didn't need to see her again. Not there, not now. And still, he felt her, not as a presence anymore, but something more intrusive. Inside him, nestled deep, like she'd found a corner of his mind that hadn't been locked up tightly enough, and curled into it. Sleeping. Watching. Walter was waiting on the porch when Jonah pulled in. He didn't wave, didn't speak. Just stared with those flat eyes that had seen too much already. Jonah stepped out of the car, every muscle aching, throat dry like he'd swallowed ash. "She's gone," Jonah said. Walter didn't nod, didn't move. "You're bleeding." Jonah looked down. There was a tear in his shirt, just below the ribs. The fabric was stiff with blood he hadn't noticed before. A shallow slice, not deep but long, thin, precise. He didn't remember when it happened. "She marked you," Walter said. "Last second, maybe. Or maybe the moment you stepped into the house the first time. Either way, it's done now." Jonah pressed a hand to the wound. "I buried her. I sealed the circle. I spoke her name. That put her back," Walter said. "But it doesn't mean she's gone. You closed a door, but she slipped something through before it shut." "What does that mean?" Walter finally turned away, walked back into the house. Jonah followed, heart beating too fast. The living room looked different now, less cluttered. The charms and bones that had once hung from every surface were gone, replaced by clean white candles and a small wooden box in the center of the floor. "Sit," Walter said, motioning to the floor across from him. Jonah sat. Walter opened the box. Inside were black stones, all smooth and oval, each with a symbol carved into it. One by one, he laid them out in a circle. Not touching, just close enough to suggest shape. Then he placed a glass bowl of water in the center and dipped a branch of sage into it, letting droplets fall onto the stones. "This isn't magic," Walter said. "It's memory. The world has ways of remembering what it doesn't want to repeat. You just have to listen." Jonah didn't speak. He was too tired, too afraid to break whatever this was. Walter closed his eyes. His lips moved, slow and soundless. The room grew colder. The flame on the candle closest to Jonah flickered once, then turned blue. The bowl of water rippled. Jonah leaned in and saw her. Not in the water. Not exactly, but in the reflection. Her outline hovered there, beneath the surface. Just a hint of her stitched mouth and wide, staring eyes. "She's in the hollow," Walter whispered. "The what?" "There's a space inside people," he said. "A place where thoughts don't go, where fear lives. That's where she is now, feeding slow, waiting." Jonah clenched his fists. I won, Walter." Walter opened his eyes, and Jonah wished he hadn't. There was sorrow there, and certainty. "She let you win." Jonah recoiled. No, I saw her go down. I saw. She wanted you to see," Walter said. "She gave you what you needed. Closure. A false sense of ending. That's how she gets in deep. You bury her thinking it's done. But all the while, she's winding herself tighter around your soul, eating the parts you don't use." Jonah stood. "So what do I do now?" Walter didn't answer. Just stared at the bowl, where her face had begun to smile. "You prepare," he finally said. "Because next time, it won't be whispers in the dark. She'll wear you. Use your voice, your memories. She'll smile through your face, and you won't know where she ends and you begin." Jonah backed away. The room spun. He pressed a hand to the wall, steadying himself. "I thought you were here to help." "I did help," Walter said. "I kept her from coming through the house. But the moment you took her into yourself, when you saw her, named her, felt for her, that's when you made her real." Jonah wanted to scream, to punch the wall, to break something just to feel like he still had control. But all he could do was whisper, "How long?" Walter shrugged. "Days. Weeks. Could be longer. But she'll grow stronger the more you think about her, the more others know about her. Sooner or later, The girl you saw won't be the one walking around. That night, Jonah dreamed of teeth. Not fangs. Not monstrous. Just ordinary human teeth, stacked in piles. He stood in a room made of bone, every wall humming with whispers. He couldn't move. Couldn't speak. And then she stepped out of the corner, her eyes open and mouth still sewn, but smiling wider than before. She reached toward him, and when her fingers touched his chest, he saw a second Jonah staring back at him from behind her. His own reflection, but empty-eyed. Smiling, he woke up screaming. Sweat drenched the sheets. The window was open. He hadn't left it open. A single black feather sat on the pillow beside him. He left Walter's place before sunrise. There was nothing more to say. He drove without direction, following roads until they turned to gravel, then to dirt. The trees blurred past. The thoughts came too fast to hold. He remembered his sister's warning. Don't film her. Don't talk to her. Don't feed her. But what if he already had? At a truck stop outside of Vermont, Jonah stopped for coffee. He hadn't eaten in a day. Maybe 2. Everything tasted like ash now. He stared into the cup, watching the steam rise, and caught her reflection again. Not in the surface. In the silver napkin dispenser. Just her smile. When he blinked, it was gone. A woman behind the counter asked if he was okay. He nodded, too fast, and left without drinking anything. He kept driving until his car sputtered. A small town loomed ahead, quieter than most. He booked a room at a roadside inn. The clerk gave him a strange look, like he'd seen Jonah before but couldn't place when. The room was clean. The mirror was covered with a blanket before Jonah even took off his coat. He placed the dagger beneath his pillow again, not because he thought it would help, but because it was the only thing that made him feel like he still had a say in any of this. At midnight, the lights flickered. Something knocked at the door 3 times. Soft, precise. Jonah didn't move. The knock came again, then a voice, not hers. Emma's. Jonah, it's me. Open up, please. His mouth went dry. He stepped toward the door, hand outstretched. Then he stopped. Emma lived 2 states away. He hadn't told her where he was. He backed away, slow and careful, until he hit the far wall. The doorknob rattled once, twice, then stopped. No footsteps followed. Just a long, low whisper, "You're already mine," and scratched into the inside of the window. Just visible beneath the blanket were the same 4 words again. "She tasted you first." Jonah didn't sleep. He couldn't. The whisper still echoed. Not in his ears, but somewhere beneath the surface of his skin, like it had nestled into the marrow of his bones, and was vibrating soft and steady, just below hearing. He sat in the corner of the motel room, dagger across his lap, eyes fixed on the door. It hadn't moved since the knock. No more voices, no footsteps. But the silence was worse. It watched him. It felt full, pregnant with something waiting to exhale. He checked the time. 3:19 a.m. The hour always felt off. Not quite the dead of night, not yet the bleeding start of morning. Just that gray in between, where shadows pretend to be still and the air carries things it shouldn't. He tried to call Emma. No signal. Again, Jonah stared at the dagger. He wondered if it would hurt her, if it would even touch her now. Walter said it was meant to sever, not stop. But severing what? A thread, a bond. Or something deeper, something that had begun to stitch itself into his brain. He looked at his arm. The cut beneath his ribs wasn't the only mark anymore. Somewhere in the middle of the night, a second had appeared. Small, high on the inside of his forearm. It looked like a burn at first, but too precise. A perfect circle, smooth, red around the edges. In the center, the faintest imprint of a tooth. Not a bite. Just a press, like something had rested its mouth there. He hadn't felt it happen. He touched it and recoiled. Not from pain, from the sensation, like pressing down on a full beehive, just before it cracks. Jonah got up and went to the bathroom, peeled the blanket off the mirror. He had to know. His reflection stared back. Pale, sunken eyes, lips cracked. He barely recognized himself. but it was still him. He leaned in, closer. Then his reflection blinked, and he didn't. Jonah stepped back, heart slamming. The version of him in the mirror smiled just slightly. A twitch of the lips. Then it tilted its head. Her movement. That same unnatural, twitching angle. The reflection opened its mouth, just a sliver, and Jonah could see the threads pulling at the corners of the lips. Stitches. Tight and black, but unraveling. A voice cracked through the glass, not loud, but sharp, like a whisper sliced through radio static. Do you want to see what it's like? Jonah dropped the blanket back over the mirror and backed out of the bathroom. He knew what she was doing now. She wasn't chasing him. She was replacing him. Thought by thought, dream by dream. It would be easy to give in. Let her in. Easier than fighting. Easier than being alone in every moment with no one to trust. Walter had helped, yes. But he'd also looked at Jonah like a man already buried. Like he was just waiting for the dirt to settle. Jonah paced the room, trying to think. Where do you go when the danger isn't outside anymore? He pulled out the notepad Emma had given him once, before all of this. Back when he was just filming ghost stories and chasing shadows for clicks. She always told him to keep a hard copy of notes. Screens glitch, she'd said, but ink is stubborn. He flipped through it. Pages of scribbles, symbols Walter had taught him. Ideas, warnings. Somewhere in the middle, one entry stood out. It wasn't his handwriting. She listens when you think too loudly. Beneath it, don't forget the door under the floor. Jonah frowned. He didn't remember writing that. Didn't remember seeing it before. But it was in his notebook, in ink that had dried long ago. He flipped back to the first page. There, in the top right corner, was a single, crudely drawn eye, not human. Too wide. Too long. He'd never drawn that. He was sure of it. He closed the book and stuffed it in his bag. He had to leave. Again. The problem was, he didn't know where to go. The Bellamy house was out of the question. He wasn't ready to go back there. Not yet. Walter's place. Maybe. But she'd already whispered through his hallway. She knew the way now. Any place he ran to was just another room. She'd figure out how to enter. Unless he opened his laptop. Paranoia made him hesitate, but he couldn't afford not to look. He searched the forums. The old ones. The ones buried 3 or 4 layers deep, where people talked about the kinds of things you weren't supposed to believe in. Most of them were trolls or trauma dumpers. But every now and then, someone told a story that felt real. Jonah searched for stitched mouth girl and found nothing. Then he tried whispers and reflections, and hit something. A thread, years old, nearly buried. A user named Wayward Glass had posted a single photo, blurry, badly lit, of a mirror cracked in 4 places. In the reflection, barely visible, was the silhouette of a child. Her mouth had thick, dark lines across it. In the caption, she only comes when you film the silence. Jonah's skin prickled. He messaged the user. Didn't expect a response. But 5 minutes later, a reply came. You've seen her. Haven't you? He typed yes. She's in me now, I think. Then you're already on borrowed time. The more people you talk to, the stronger she gets. Jonah hesitated. What do I do? There's a place, a cabin, deep woods, Burnt Pines, New Hampshire. It's been warded for decades. No reflections. No electricity. Go there. It's the only place she can't follow without help. Jonah's breath caught. Help from who? No reply. He waited. 5 minutes. 10. Nothing. When he refreshed the page, the thread was gone. Deleted. The user account no longer existed. Jonah sat still for a long time. Then he stood, packed, got in the car, and started driving north. By the time he reached Burnt Pines, it was evening. The trees here were charred black, as if lightning had once danced through them in a frenzy. The cabin was exactly where the map said it would be, hidden behind a crooked fence and shielded by overgrown brush. It looked abandoned, roof half caved, door cracked at the hinges. But it felt quiet, not the bad kind, not hollow or watched. Just empty. Jonah stepped inside. No mirrors. No screens. No signs of life. He lit the old oil lamp hanging from the ceiling, and its soft glow filled the room with warm, amber light. For the first time in what felt like days, he exhaled fully, and then he heard it. A slow, dragging scratch under the floorboards. He dropped to his knees, listened. Another scrape, then a pause. Then 3 knocks, exactly like the motel. Jonah's fingers trembled as he remembered the note from the journal. Don't forget the door under the floor. He searched, frantic now, until he found a loose board beneath a threadbare rug. He pried it up. Beneath it, a trapdoor. Old, iron, and etched with unfamiliar symbols. He hesitated, then opened it. Below was a stairwell, descending into pitch black, and from the dark a sound rose. Not a voice, not a growl, but humming, a lullaby. His mother's, and above it all, carved in perfect script on the trapdoor's underside, were words that made his blood stop cold. She was always in you. Jonah's fingers hovered over the open trapdoor as the lullaby spilled out from the dark like a gas leak. Slow, seeping, and deadly. It wasn't just a song, it was his lullaby. The one his mother used to sing before the cancer took her voice, the one he hadn't heard in over 20 years. Hearing it now, from beneath a cabin that should have been empty, that felt safe, was like having a memory ripped from his mind and thrown back at him, rotten and wrong. The sound shouldn't have reached him the way it did. It wasn't just echoing from below. It was inside his ears, burrowed behind his eardrums. The kind of sound you don't hear, but feel, like pressure building behind your eyes. He wanted to close the trapdoor, nail it shut, burn the cabin down if he had to. But curiosity, that old, dangerous part of him, that once led him into haunted prisons and silent asylums, whispered louder than the fear. He needed to see. If this was the hollow Evelyn had slipped into, if this was the space where she nested, then it wasn't enough to run from her anymore. He had to find the source, the root, and rip it out. He lit the second oil lamp hanging near the wall. The flame danced as he descended the creaking wooden stairs, one slow step at a time. They groaned under his weight like they hadn't held a person in decades. With each footfall, the lullaby grew clearer, louder, not sung now, but hummed. And not by one voice. By many. There was a rhythm to it too, a low, subtle thump beneath the melody, like a heartbeat trapped behind stone. Jonah reached the bottom and stepped into a narrow corridor cut from the earth itself. Roots jutted from the walls like veins. The air was wet and metallic, not just musty, not just old. It smelled like birth, like something waiting. At the far end of the corridor stood a door, not wood, but stone, heavy and cracked, with a thin seam of dark fluid oozing from the base. His hand trembled as he reached for it. The symbols carved into the surface weren't familiar, but something in him knew them, the same way a child knows a mother's face before understanding names. He touched the stone. The humming stopped, instant. Final. Silence crushed the hallway like a lid snapping shut. And then the voices began. Not words. Not yet. Just breath. Dozens of them. Maybe more. Soft, rasping, wet. They circled him like a breeze in reverse. Whispers slid down his spine. They were coming from the walls. From inside the walls. He turned slowly and realized the roots weren't roots at all. They were fingers. Hundreds of them, thin and pale, reaching through the dirt like worms. Some twitched. Some stroked the air. One brushed the back of his neck. He lurched forward and shoved the stone door. It didn't budge. A voice from behind him whispered, "She's almost ready." Jonah spun, brandishing the dagger. No one there. Only the corridor, tightening. The air was thick now. Hard to breathe. He pressed both hands against the door and pushed. This time it opened. Not because of his strength. Because something on the other side let him in. The chamber beyond was impossibly large. Jonah stepped into it, and the air shifted. The walls curved outward, covered in flesh, like folds that pulsed with slow, deep movements. In the center of the room was a pit. From it rose a figure, tall, impossibly thin, draped in a veil of stitched-together skin. It wasn't Evelyn. It was what Evelyn had become, or what had always been underneath her. It didn't move, didn't breathe, but the air rippled around it like heat over asphalt. Jonah stepped closer. His mouth opened unbidden. "You're the Hollow." The thing lifted its head, only slightly. It had no face, no eyes, no mouth, only folds. As if it hadn't decided what face to wear yet. Jonah's skin crawled as he realized it was waiting for his. He gripped the dagger. "I'm ending this." The Hollow spoke, not with a voice, but with sensation. A wave of thoughts that flooded him all at once. "You are mine already. You made room. You listened. You looked. You loved her." Jonah staggered backward. No, I didn't. I fought you." But the Hollow's presence pressed in, overwhelming. The fingers from the corridor reached into the chamber now, clawing through the floor and walls. They weren't just touching him. They were searching, feeling through his memories. He saw his mother, pale and fading in her hospital bed. Her smile the last day she spoke. The lullaby. He saw the Bellamy house, its door yawning open. The basement. The freezer. He saw Evelyn's face when she looked at him. Not pleading, not malicious, recognizing. And something inside Jonah broke, because deep down he had felt something. Not pity, not terror, familiarity. The Hollow surged forward without moving. Its body expanded. The skin, stitching began to split. A second shape pushed forward from beneath the veil, smaller, girl-sized. Pale hands reached out. Evelyn. Her lips were no longer sewn. She opened her mouth and spoke. "Help me." Just 2 words. But they didn't echo. They sank. Jonah's knees buckled. He wanted to believe it was still a trick, that this was another layer of manipulation. But he'd seen something in her eyes before, behind the stitching. Fear. Not just rage. And then he understood. The Hollow wasn't Evelyn. Evelyn was trapped inside it. She hadn't brought it into the world. It had worn her like a mask. All this time, everyone had blamed the child, the whispers, the drawings. But she'd been fighting, holding the Hollow inside her, containing it, until the Bellamys vanished, until Jonah walked into that house and named her, looked at her with curiosity instead of fear. He hadn't freed Evelyn. He'd freed the thing that killed her. The chamber shook. The veil dropped, and Evelyn screamed, not at him, but through him. Her voice burst out of his throat, cracking the air like a bone snapping. It was pain. Pure, undiluted. Centuries of torment squeezed into one sound. The dagger in his hand heated, burned. He didn't think. He acted. Jonah threw himself forward, drove the blade into the floor of the chamber, into the heart of the Hollow. Not the body, not the mask, but the ground itself, the nest, the seed, the anchor. Light exploded from the point of impact. White, clean, terrible. The chamber cracked. The Hollow wailed, a sound made of emptiness. Fingers shriveled. Roots burned. The voice in his head shattered into 1,000 broken thoughts. And Jonah knew, as he collapsed, that this wasn't victory. It was eviction. He had ripped the Hollow out. But something had to stay in its place. Something had to fill the Hollow it left behind. Darkness took him. And from somewhere far away, he heard Evelyn's voice one last time. "Thank you." But it wasn't over. Because when Jonah woke up, he wasn't in the cabin. He was standing in the Bellamy house, and every mirror in the room was smiling. The air inside the Bellamy house was different this time. Not heavy, not stifling like before, but still. Unnaturally so. As though time had paused just long enough for the house to exhale and forget how to breathe again. Jonah stood in the hallway barefoot, wearing the same shirt he'd fallen unconscious in, but it was clean now. No dirt, no blood. Even the mark on his arm was gone. Though when he looked down, he could feel where it had been, as if the absence of the wound was a deeper kind of scar. He didn't remember how he got here. One moment, he was collapsing in that writhing underground chamber, the dagger burning in his palm. The next, this, back where it started. As if all of it, the cabin, the trapdoor. Evelyn's scream, had been folded into itself and tucked neatly into a corner of his memory. But the house remembered. It always did. Jonah took a tentative step forward. The floor didn't creak. That unsettled him more than any groan of old wood ever could. Every board felt freshly laid, clean varnished, not a speck of dust in sight. As though the house had been reset. The mirrors, though, those weren't the same. There was one at the end of the hall, full length, oval, framed in black, iron like a wrought iron gate. He didn't remember it being there before. And that wasn't what made his stomach tighten. It was the fact that every mirror in the house now reflected him smiling, no matter what his face actually did. He stared into the first one, face pale, mouth grim, and yet his reflection grinned at him like a man reunited with an old friend. He walked past it, refused to stop again. Each room was pristine. The kitchen gleamed. The furniture stood upright, unstained, untouched by time. No signs of decay, no blood, not even a speck of dust. But nothing about it felt lived in. It was a stage, a replica. As though the house was trying to convince him it had always been this way. That it had never been rotting. That there had never been Evelyn. Never been a freezer of dirt or a whisper in the dark. But it couldn't hide the mirrors. Every room had one now, some in places no mirror should be. Inside cupboards, beneath tables. Even the stove door was now a polished reflective surface. Each one showed him, smiling, blinking, watching, not mirroring, observing. He stopped at the staircase, the one leading to the basement. The door was wide open, light spilling up instead of down. It wasn't the dim yellow of a single bulb. It was white, sterile, like the kind you'd find in a hospital corridor. Jonah hesitated. Every instinct told him to run. Aggressive. To get out of this house before whatever was wearing his face stepped out of one of those mirrors and took over what little of himself remained. But he also knew this wasn't just about him anymore. He stepped onto the stairs. As he descended, the light dimmed. Not flickered, just faded. Like it was being absorbed, and with every step, his reflection joined him. Not beside him, not across from him, but in the walls. In the corners of his eyes. The movement he saw didn't come from the direction he was facing. The reflections now watched him from angles that shouldn't exist. They were above him. Beneath. Behind. And all of them still smiled. He reached the bottom and found nothing. No freezer. No roots. Just bare concrete and smooth walls, except for one door at the far end, new, steel, modern. Out of place, as though installed just recently. Jonah approached, and as he did, he saw the small plate mounted beside it. Jonah Thorne visitor, he froze. That wasn't his handwriting. That wasn't a nameplate that should exist. Yet there it was. The letters engraved, as real as anything else in the room. He reached for the handle. It turned easily. What waited beyond was a room unlike anything else in the house. Glass. Endless glass. Walls of mirrors, each angled, each reflecting not just him, but versions of him. One with blood on his face. One crying. One laughing so hard it looked painful. One that looked dead. Their mouths all moved independently, like a choir of possibilities singing a wordless hymn. At the center of the room stood a chair, occupied. The figure seated there looked like him, but emaciated, mouth stitched shut, skin pale and sagging. His twin. Or what he would look like soon, if this kept going. The stitched Jonah raised its head, and the stitches began to pull apart, not torn, not forced, but released. As though the threads had been waiting to loosen themselves. Then it spoke. Why do you keep fighting? Jonah took a step back. The voice was his, flat. Tired. Who are you? He asked. I'm the part you've buried, the figure said. The piece you left behind to carry the weight. Every dark thought. Every moment of guilt. You pushed me down into the hollow and told yourself you were clean. Jonah shook his head. You're not real. You're her. The hollow. The figure smiled, gently. I'm what's left of you after she tasted you. I didn't belong to her. You gave me to her, piece by piece. Behind him, the mirrors rippled. and from them others stepped through. Jonah recognized them all. Himself at 16, staring at the floor during his mother's funeral, refusing to cry. Himself at 22, laughing during an interview, pretending to care. Himself at 28, whispering in a ruined prison, "I hope something answers." They circled him now. Dozens, maybe more. "You think you can walk away?" the stitched version said. "You invited her. You opened the freezer. You said her name. You gave her shape. And now, she wears you like you wore her story." Jonah clutched his head. The voices weren't coming from around him anymore. They were inside. He tried to remember his name, but even that was starting to slip. The stitched Jonah stood, reached out a hand. "It's easier if you stop struggling. You're already hollowed out. Let go. Let us fill you." Jonah stared at the hand, his own fingers. He thought of Evelyn, of her scream, of her eyes when she realized he wasn't like the others. He remembered her final whisper, "Thank you." And something lit inside him. Small, not hope, not strength, just clarity. He reached into his coat pocket. The dagger was gone. Of course it was. But the notebook wasn't. He yanked it out, flipped through the pages until he found the line, "She listens when you think too loudly." Then another he hadn't seen before. Scrawled beneath it, "She can't mimic what she doesn't understand." Jonah smiled. First real one in days. He looked up, straight at the stitched version of himself, and he said, "Tell me something. What was my mother's last word to me?" The thing paused, smiled wider, then said, "Run." Wrong answer, because that wasn't what she'd said. She'd said live. And Jonah knew then. It wasn't just Evelyn that had been buried. He had too. And if he wanted to break free, he had to do something none of them could mimic. He ran. Not away, but into the mirror behind the stitched Jonah. It shattered on impact, and instead of glass, he fell through light, blinding, scorching, pure, and as he tumbled through it, one last voice followed him. Not hers, his. "You can't keep running from yourself forever." And then, blackness. But this time, he wasn't alone. Something had followed him out. Jonah woke up in a field of frost. The kind that doesn't come from winter, but from somewhere deeper. A cold that clings to the inside of your lungs and settles in the marrow like an infection. The sky above him was slate gray. Not quite night, but nowhere near morning. No sun, no moon. Just that sick, colorless haze. The grass around him was dead, brittle. Every blade sharp enough to cut if touched too long. He sat up slowly, breath visible in the air, though he wasn't sure if it was from the cold or the thing still rattling inside his chest. The fall through the mirror hadn't hurt him, not physically, but something had shifted, not just in his surroundings, in him. He could feel it, the sense that something was out of place in his body, as if someone had rearranged the furniture inside his mind while he slept. He touched his face. It was still his. His hands were still his hands. But there was a voice whispering in the quiet between heartbeats. Not Evelyn. Not the hollow. Something new. More curious. He stood and turned slowly, taking in the landscape. There were no trees. No buildings. Only endless frost and patches of earth cracked like old paint. In the distance, a shape loomed through the mist. Something tall, angular, out of place. A doorway. Just a freestanding doorframe in the middle of nothing, made of rotted wood and bound in rusted wire. He approached it. The wind picked up the closer he got, but not in gusts. It moved around him, against him, as though resisting. As if the very air didn't want him to get any closer. He reached the frame. There was no door, just the outline of where one should be. On the threshold, a smear of something dark. Not blood. Something older. It pulsed softly underfoot like a wound that hadn't closed. As Jonah stepped through it, the world blinked. Not dimmed, not changed. Blink. One moment, the field. The next, an old bedroom. His childhood bedroom. Exactly as it had been when he was 9. The posters. The shelves. The red model car he'd glued together crooked. The same uneven floorboard by the closet. He looked down at himself. Still adult. still blood-stained, worn. But the room hadn't aged a day. Jonah backed toward the wall, heart racing. This isn't real. A laugh answered him, small, innocent. And then, footsteps, from the hallway beyond the cracked open bedroom door. Slow, deliberate, bare feet on hardwood. Jonah froze. A shadow passed just outside the doorway. Small, child-sized. He held his breath. Then the voice, "You left me." Jonah's knees buckled. He knew that voice. It was his own, but younger, fragile, trembling with betrayal. "You stopped looking," the voice said. "You promised you'd never forget me." Jonah pushed the door open. The hallway was dim. His mother's photo still hung at the end of it, but the smiling woman in the frame had no eyes. In her place, staring out, was a dark smudge, like soot burned into the glass, and below it a trail of tiny footprints. They led to the attic stairs. He climbed them. Slowly. The attic was dark, only lit by a single bulb swinging above a dusty trunk, and beside that trunk stood himself. But not the stitched version, not the hollowed-out reflection. A child, Jonah at 9, eyes sunken, mouth trembling. "Do you remember what you said?" the boy whispered. Jonah didn't answer. "You said if I was ever scared, you'd protect me. But when she came, you didn't protect me. You opened the door. You watched her hurt me, and you let her wear me." Jonah shook his head. "I didn't know. I didn't understand. She did." The child's eyes rolled back, and from his mouth the voice changed. Low, velvet, familiar. "Thank you for making room," it said. The child's skin split open, not with blood, but light. Not warm, glowing light, but cold, surgical light, the kind that exposes everything. And from within stepped Evelyn. Not the girl, not the ghost, the presence. Older, taller, wearing a mockery of Jonah's own face, stitch-free. Her smile was kind now, understanding, almost gentle. "You're almost ready," she said. "Just one more step." Jonah stepped back. "I won't let you take me." "You already did," she said softly. "Every time you questioned your memories. Every time you looked into a mirror and wondered if you were still real. You think that's your voice in your head now. You think that doubt belongs to you." Jonah felt dizzy. The attic warped. The walls bent inward. The floor softened beneath his feet. He looked down. He was standing on the surface of the Bellamy freezer lid again. And beneath it, he saw her, the real Evelyn, wide-eyed and screaming without sound. Not a monster, a prisoner. Her hands clawed at the glass. Jonah knelt and pressed his palm to the lid. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I see you now." The version of her standing behind him screamed, shrill and furious. The glass shattered, and Evelyn, the real one, reached out. He took her hand, and the attic exploded into water. Jonah surfaced in darkness, gasping, drenched, clawing at mud and wet roots. He'd washed up at the edge of a lake. The trees above him were bare. Wind howled through them like sirens, and standing at the edge of the water, just watching, was a figure. A girl, young, soaked, silent, but not stitched. She just watched him with sad, tired eyes. Then she raised her hand and pointed, not at him, but to the forest behind him. He turned, and saw movement, shadows, multiple. Something had followed him out, and it wasn't her. He scrambled up the bank, legs weak, chest heaving. The girl said only one word. "Run." He ran, and in the distance the trees whispered it back. Run. Because now, she wasn't alone. The forest was not meant to be run through at night. Branches clawed at Jonah's face, drawing thin, burning scratches across his skin as he stumbled through underbrush so thick it felt intentional. The trees here were too close together, their trunks warped and gnarled like limbs reaching for him. The ground beneath him gave way without warning, soft patches of earth that sucked at his boots like mouths in the soil. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. Not with what he saw behind him. They weren't chasing in the usual sense. There were no pounding footsteps, no roar or scream to alert him. What followed him moved like fog, like memory, silent, relentless, and familiar. Not one figure, but many. Shapes that resembled people he knew, or thought he'd forgotten. a silhouette with his father's slouch, a flicker of a face that looked like his childhood friend who vanished in 2005, a form, tall and gliding, that bore the outline of Walter. Except none of them were real. None of them were right. They wore the skin of memory, but their eyes were Evelyn's. Wide, dark, and stitched with something invisible. Not thread this time. Something deeper, like the stitching had moved inward, sewing through the soul instead of the flesh, and they followed only when he remembered them. Every time he thought of someone he'd lost, someone he'd betrayed, someone he'd failed, a new shadow broke free from the trees behind him. They fed on memory, on guilt, on connection. They came when he remembered. So Jonah tried not to. He focused on the present, the next step, the breath in his lungs, the sting in his thighs, nothing else. But thoughts don't listen, and memory is cruel. He slipped, landed hard against a moss-covered rock. Pain bloomed along his ribs. White, hot and immediate, he sucked in a breath, and that's when it happened. He thought of her. Evelyn, the real one. The girl he'd seen under the lid. The girl who had reached for him not to drag him down, but to escape. The forest reacted. The trees groaned as if turning their heads. And then silence. Worse than footsteps. Worse than pursuit. Because in that silence, they waited. Jonah forced himself to stand. He could barely see the path now, but there was light ahead, faint, flickering. Not the cold burn of the hollow's mirror world. This light was orange. Warm. Fire. He staggered toward it, limbs heavy, lungs raw. The shapes behind him didn't follow fast. They didn't need to. They knew where he was going. They wanted him to reach it. He broke through the last wall of trees into a small clearing. A cabin stood in the center. Not the first. Not Walter's. This one was different. New. But wrong. Too perfect. Too placed. The kind of perfection that suggests mimicry, not memory. It looked like a memory trying to be real. Light glowed in the windows. The front door was slightly open, like it had been waiting for him. Inside, the smell of smoke and food. Not rotting. Not corrupted. Just home. That's how he knew it was a trap. But he stepped in anyway. The inside of the cabin was warm. The fire crackled in the hearth. A stew simmered on the stove, and the scent made Jonah's stomach cramp with hunger. He hadn't eaten in days. He knew that, and yet his body had forgotten until now. The aroma wrapped around him like a mother's arms. There were no mirrors here, but that was the first red flag. Because Jonah understood now. The hollow had never needed mirrors. Mirrors were just her way of letting him see. But now that she was deeper, closer, she didn't need them at all. She could use anything. He sat down at the table, eyes fixed on the bowl of stew already placed for him. Steam curled up gently. Beside it, a folded note. He opened it with shaking fingers. You're hungry because she is. You're tired because she's waking up. The more you want to be whole, the more she takes. No signature. No handwriting he recognized. Jonah shoved the bowl away. It crashed to the ground and shattered, spilling thick, red broth that soaked into the wooden floor. And in the silence that followed, he heard breathing. Not from behind. From below. He dropped to one knee and pressed his ear to the floor. Yes! Definitely breathing. Deep. Slow. Massive. Like something asleep beneath the cabin. Like something dreaming of being him. He stood fast, knocking over the chair. His breath clouded in the now cold air. The warmth vanished in an instant, and behind him, the door creaked closed. He turned. It wasn't Evelyn in the doorway. It was his mother. But not the sick, dying version. This was the young version. Alive. Beautiful. Smiling. She held out her arms. Jonah? He took one step back. She took one forward. Don't be afraid, she said. You can rest now. You've done enough. Jonah's throat tightened. You're not real. She tilted her head. I'm everything you miss. Everything you want to fix. Let me take it. Let us take it. You don't have to carry it anymore. From the walls, the shadows stepped out. More faces. More voices. Emma Walter. Himself? Evelyn as a child. Evelyn as the thing beneath the mirror. Evelyn as the part of him he'd buried. They all looked at him with the same hunger. Not for flesh, for place. "You're a vessel," his mother said. "All you have to do is stop resisting. Let it in." Jonah stared at her, then closed his eyes. He thought, loudly. So loudly, it felt like shouting. She can't mimic what she doesn't understand. Emotion, grief, choice. He reached into his coat, no dagger, but his notebook was still there. He opened it. A new message waited for him. Burn what she built. Jonah turned and grabbed a fire iron from the hearth. He swung it once, hard, into the walls. The flames exploded outward, unnatural and violent, as though they had been waiting under the surface. The cabin screamed. Not wood. The walls screamed. The shadows screamed. His mother's image convulsed and collapsed, skin boiling. Face melting into the forms of others she'd stolen. And from the floor, the breathing turned to growling. The entire cabin twisted, the floor splitting down the center. A hand, long, black, veined, and inhuman, rose from below. Jonah didn't run this time. He drove the fire iron down onto it with all his strength. The hand shattered like porcelain, and from the broken fingers, something white leaked out. Light. Real light. The forest cracked open above him, and Jonah, burned broken, fell through, not into death, but into somewhere else, somewhere he hoped she hadn't yet followed. But just before everything went white, he heard her whisper again. Not angry, not even close, just amused. "You'll have to sleep eventually." Jonah woke gasping, eyes snapping open to a sky that wasn't his. It was colorless again, but not dark, more like an overexposed photograph, where light had erased the details instead of revealing them. He sat up slowly, every muscle in his body throbbing with exhaustion, the kind that didn't come from running or fighting or falling through hellish reflections. It was deeper than that. The kind of fatigue that settled in the soul, whispering about giving up, about letting go, about surrendering just once because sleep would be easier than knowing. But sleep, he understood now, wasn't a place to rest. It was a door, and she had the key. He stood in what appeared to be a massive, open plain, white, endless, and smooth underfoot like glass dusted with ash. The wind didn't blow here. There were no trees, no buildings, not even the sound of birds or insects. Just silence. Complete, pure silence. Then, footsteps. His, but not under his own feet, from behind. He didn't turn. Not yet, he knew the rules now. Turning gave them shape. Recognition gave them power. If he looked, if he remembered too clearly, if he believed, they'd follow. They'd stick. He walked, and the footsteps behind him walked too. Always one beat off. He spoke out loud to break the rhythm. "If this is a dream," he muttered, "I want to wake up now." A voice responded, not behind him, not beside him, but inside. "This isn't a dream. This is where dreams go when they're forgotten." He stopped. The wind hadn't picked up, but the silence had tightened, compressed. He turned, and the plane had changed. It was a hallway now. Long, endless, no walls, just door frames, hundreds, maybe thousands, suspended in air like scaffolding in a half-built universe. Each door was different. Some rotted, some gilded, some small, some impossibly large, all of them closed. Except one. The door at the far end was ajar. From within it spilled dim, amber light, the kind of glow found in firelit parlors or memories of autumn nights. He walked toward it. He didn't want to, but his feet knew something he didn't. That door was his, and behind it, something waited. Not Evelyn. Not exactly. Not anymore. The hallway bent around him as he approached. Time shifted. One step stretched for minutes. The next passed in a blink. When he finally reached the door, he paused. The number carved into the frame was 313. A hotel room, but not just any. His first motel stop after the Bellamy house. He remembered the layout now. The carpet with the cigarette burns. The cracked mirror above the sink. The scratch on the inside of the window. The whisper in the night. He stepped inside. And the room was exactly as it had been. Down to the half-drunk cup of coffee on the nightstand, and the blanket crumpled near the door, except for the girl sitting on the bed. Evelyn, small again, legs swinging off the edge, her mouth no longer sewn, her eyes soft. But something inside Jonah screamed this wasn't her. "You know this isn't how it ends," he said. She nodded. "Of course. But we're not at the end yet." He stepped closer. "Why this room?" She smiled. "Because this is where you almost let me in. Where you first wondered if maybe I wasn't so different from you." He swallowed hard. That wasn't trust. That was fear. She tilted her head. "What's the difference, Jonah?" Behind her, the wall rippled. A mirror began to form, not quickly, not suddenly, just inevitably. The glass stretched itself into existence, piece by piece, until his reflection stared back at him. Only it wasn't him. It was the Jonah from the field of frost, the one who hadn't run, who had stayed with her. Let her in. That version smiled. "I'm getting stronger," she said, "because part of you wants me, part of you likes me. The way I see your memories. The way I remember what you don't want to. The way I whisper when you're alone. You like it." Jonah took another step forward. His hands were fists. "You're a parasite." She stood now, no longer a child, older, taller, her face shifting, moment to moment. Sometimes it was Evelyn, sometimes his mother, sometimes Emma, sometimes a stranger. "I'm the hollow part of you," she said. "The one you pretend isn't there. I didn't come from nowhere. I didn't crawl out of the dirt." She pointed at the mirror. "I came from you." The glass cracked. Jonah staggered, and she moved, fast. One hand touched his chest. The contact was like ice melting through bone, not pain, not yet. Just the promise of something worse. "You sleep, I feed," she whispered. "You think I grow. You deny me, I multiply." He gritted his teeth. "Then I won't sleep." "You will," she said, "because no one can stay awake forever." He shoved her hand away. The room pulsed. The walls vibrated. Light fractured. "I can still fight," he said. She laughed, his laugh. "Then wake up," she said, and pushed him backward into the mirror. Jonah woke up gasping again, this time in a bed, a real one, a hospital room, clean sheets, beeping monitors, an IV in his arm. Sunlight filtered through the blinds. His skin was cold, his mouth dry. A nurse entered, startled to see him awake. "You're lucky," she said. "They found you in the woods, barefoot, hypothermic. You were babbling in your sleep." He tried to speak. His throat refused, but he managed a whisper. "What was I saying?" She glanced at the chart, her brow furrowed. "A name. Over and over. Evelyn, I think." He closed his eyes. Of course. She hadn't left. She'd just burrowed deeper. He turned his head slightly, just enough to see the polished metal of the monitor beside his bed. In the reflection, she smiled. Jonah stared at the monitor's reflective surface, breath frozen mid-inhale. She hadn't vanished. Hadn't screamed or lunged or twisted into something grotesque. No, that would have been too easy. Too honest. Instead, she smiled at him, serene as a child sitting at the edge of a pond, legs swinging, watching the ripples. That smile, casual, patient, wasn't meant to terrify. It was worse. It understood him now. It waited. The nurse didn't notice. She busied herself with the IV, checking vitals, tapping the screen without glancing toward it. Jonah kept his eyes fixed on the reflection, willing himself not to blink. But no matter how long he stared, she didn't move. Just watched him from inside the screen, like it was a window, and she was already home. He whispered her name once, not aloud, just in his head, and her smile widened. He shut his eyes and turned his head away. The nurse finished adjusting something near the bed. "Doctor says you were out for nearly 30 hours, she said. "Whatever you went through out there, you're lucky to be alive." "Am I?" Jonah rasped. She paused, misinterpreting the question. "Well, yes, you had a fever, mild dehydration, mild frostbite, nothing permanent. But your vitals are stable now." She patted his arm, friendly and oblivious. "Try to get some rest. You've earned it." Rest. That word hit him like a slap. "Don't," he croaked. I can't sleep," she frowned. "You haven't in days. You need to." He shook his head, sudden panic making his throat tighten. She's in my dreams. She's waiting there. The nurse offered a concerned smile, the kind you give someone on the edge. We all have nightmares after trauma. You've been through something real. Give yourself time. No, he said, voice rising despite the dryness in his mouth. This isn't a nightmare. This is something else. She gets closer every time. She's not just in my head. The nurse's smile froze, flickering for half a second. Then she straightened. I'll let the doctor know you're awake. She turned and left without another word. The door clicked shut behind her. Jonah stared at the monitor again. The reflection was gone, but that didn't mean she was. He tried to sit up, wincing as pain flared along his side. The dull ache in his muscles reminded him he still had a body, still had limits. He pulled the IV from his arm, teeth clenched, breath sharp. Blood welled, dripped onto the white sheets, then slowed. He swung his legs off the bed, and the cold tile sent a chill crawling up his spine. There were no mirrors in the room apart from the metal screen, smart, safe, but the hallway would be different. Hospitals were filled with reflective surfaces, windows, stainless steel trays. Even polished floors could become her eyes if he wasn't careful. He opened the door and stepped into the corridor. No nurses in sight, no sound, either, not even the usual murmur of voices or footsteps. Just distant humming, high-pitched, familiar. A child's voice, slow and sweet, singing a lullaby in a minor key. He turned left, away from the sound, following the sterile corridor toward the elevators. He passed an open room, glimpsed a mirror above a sink inside. Evelyn stood in it, head tilted, watching him, not smiling now. Waiting, he didn't stop, just kept walking. He found a supply closet near the end of the hall. Locked, but not too tight. A hard shove and the door gave. Inside, scrubs, towels, and a set of surgical scissors. He took them, not for defense, but just in case he needed to cut something out. When he reached the elevator, the panel reflected him back. He stared at his own face, waited, and there, barely visible, her eyes open behind his, not possessing. Just looking out, like she was peeking from inside a borrowed skin. He looked down, pressed the emergency stair access. Running was all he had left. He descended 5 flights in silence, his footsteps too loud in the stairwell. At the bottom, a side door led to the parking lot. Rain had started, not a storm, just a steady drizzle that soaked him instantly. He didn't care. He kept walking. No idea where to go, no plan, no destination. He just knew this every time he rested, she moved closer. Every time he slept, she rearranged the house inside him. He walked until the city gave way to woods, until his feet hurt, until his vision blurred. He collapsed under a rusted bus stop outside a shuttered gas station. Mud soaked through his clothes. He leaned back against the cold metal, shaking. "Still think you're alone?" a voice asked. Jonah snapped awake. He hadn't even realized he'd drifted, and stared up at a man crouching in front of him. Mid-40s. Ragged clothes. Scarred face. A sharpness in the eyes that came from years of not looking away from the wrong things. "You've seen her," the man said. "The girl with no mouth. The one who smiles when you don't." Jonah tried to speak. His voice cracked. "Who are you?" The man held out a shaking hand. "Name's Casey. I've been running too." Jonah took the hand, and in Casey's palm was a familiar burn. A perfect, red circle, just like Jonah's. Casey nodded. "She marks all of us." Jonah's voice was barely audible. "How do you stop her?" "You don't," Casey said, eyes distant. "But maybe, you can contain her for a while." Jonah swallowed. "How?" Casey's hand tightened around his. "You have to go back." "No," Jonah said. "I've already been back. I buried her. I saw what's under." Casey leaned in, voice shaking. "You buried a part of her. The rest. That's still walking around in people like us." "She's fragmented, Jonah. She's broken. And every time someone sees her, speaks her name, dreams her shape." He let go of Jonah's hand and held up a rusted pocket mirror. "Another piece snaps back into place. Jonah recoiled. His reflection was smiling again, and behind both of them, a third face. Smiling wider, eyes closed, just waiting. Sleep's not the only door, Casey whispered. Memory is another. And then Jonah remembered something. Something he hadn't dared to think about since it happened. The first story he'd ever filmed. The very first. A missing girl. No trace, no clues. Only a mirror, left behind, in the woods. Cracked down the middle, and on the glass, written in something dark, "You saw me once. You'll see me again." He hadn't realized it then, but he'd already opened the door, long, long ago, and now she was almost home. The rain picked up, tapping a frantic rhythm on the tin roof above the bus stop like impatient fingers on glass. Jonah sat motionless, eyes fixed on the small pocket mirror in Casey's outstretched hand. He didn't want to take it. He didn't want to look again. Every time he looked, something changed. Something grew. "I don't want it," Jonah said quietly. Casey didn't lower his hand. "Doesn't matter what you want. She's already using you. Seeing her now is just witnessing what you've become." Jonah hesitated, then finally took the mirror. It was cold. Too cold for something that had been in another man's hand, as if it had its own temperature, its own climate. He turned it over, half expecting blood to smear across the metal. But no, just rust and wear. He looked, and there he was, his own eyes, hollow but his, jaw unshaven, skin pale. But the smile, it was always the smile, a barely, there twitch at the corners of his mouth, the kind of expression that suggests a secret, something just beneath the surface. And this time her eyes were open behind his, no longer stitched shut, wide, alive, staring out from inside him. Jonah shut the mirror. "How long have you been running?" he asked. Casey didn't answer right away. He just pulled his knees to his chest and looked out at the forest like it might come alive at any second. "Since I was 17. That was the first time she found me. Not her fully, just a piece, a sliver. I saw her in the reflection of a puddle behind my parents' house. Thought it was my sister, but my sister had been dead for 2 years. Jonah leaned forward. "What did she do?" She smiled. "That's all, just smiled. Like she was happy I finally remembered." Casey rubbed the back of his neck. "She waits in the cracks. In the things we don't say. The thoughts we push away. When you forget her, you buy time. But when you remember her, that's when she grows teeth." Jonah felt sick. His thoughts swirled. Something inside him, something that wasn't entirely him, liked what Casey was saying. It nodded along in the quiet parts of his mind. It agreed, and he hated it. He stood up abruptly. "So what? We just wander around until she swallows us whole." Casey stood too. "No, we keep her fragmented. She's not whole yet. She's still rebuilding, using us to patch herself together. We stop giving her pieces." Jonah turned to him. "And how do we do that? I can't stop thinking about her. She's in everything. The way shadows move. The way silence feels. I haven't slept in days, and when I do, I wake up someplace else. She doesn't just follow me anymore, she lives in me." Casey's jaw tightened. "Then maybe it's time to do what no one else has done." Jonah blinked. "What?" "Go to where she started. Not the Bellamy house. Not the dream. The origin. The first mirror." Jonah's breath caught. "But that was years ago." "That case, she was in it," Casey said. "And you walked away, didn't you?" Jonah remembered the missing girl. No body, no blood. Just a cracked mirror leaning against a tree in the middle of nowhere. A strange fog that rolled in the moment he stepped into the woods. A whisper caught on tape, one he later chalked up to wind distortion. He hadn't known what he was walking into back then. But he should have. "I need to find the tapes," Jonah muttered. "I had them stored. On a drive. Somewhere." Casey nodded. "Then let's find them." They began walking, leaving the shelter of the bus stop behind. The gas station's broken windows watched them like blind eyes. The road ahead was cracked and lined with weeds. The rain fell softer now, but the weight in the air had grown heavier. Jonah couldn't tell if the storm was passing or coming home. They reached a diner miles down the road by nightfall. It looked like it hadn't changed since the 70s. Neon lights buzzed overhead. The place was nearly empty. Just a cook behind the counter and a lone woman in a corner booth. They sat at the bar. Casey ordered coffee. Jonah didn't. His stomach couldn't handle food anymore. Everything tasted like copper and ash. The cook poured the coffee, then leaned in. "You're Jonah Thorne, right?" Jonah froze. "Yeah." "Why?" The cook shrugged. "Heard about you. Saw your Bellamy footage a couple years ago. Didn't think you were still around." Jonah forced a thin smile, still kicking. The cook smiled back, but something in his eyes flickered. A hesitation. Like he wanted to say something else. Then he turned away. Jonah glanced over his shoulder at the woman in the corner. She was staring at him. He looked away quickly. Casey leaned in. "You feel that?" Jonah nodded. The room felt wrong. Too still. No sound except the low hum of the fridge and the occasional clink of silverware. He turned back to the counter and saw something scratched into the chrome trim beneath the napkin holder. 3 words. "Don't tiras draflugtions." He slid it away and stood up. "We need to go." Now, Casey was already moving. As they passed the corner booth, the woman turned her head. Evelyn's face looked back, but it wasn't stitched, and it wasn't hers anymore. It was Jonah's, worn like a second skin, and in his voice, she whispered, "You're not the only one who remembers." Jonah didn't respond. Didn't flinch. He kept walking. Out into the night. Back into the dark. Because now he understood something. She wasn't rebuilding herself to hurt him. She was rebuilding herself as him. Jonah didn't speak for hours after they left the diner. Casey didn't press him. He just walked beside him in silence, boots crunching on gravel. Every now and then glancing toward the trees like he expected them to lean in and whisper. They didn't. Not yet. The road ahead curved and cracked and vanished into forest deeper than Jonah remembered it being. Like the landscape was rearranging itself around his footsteps, luring him back to the source. The image from the diner wouldn't leave his head, his face on her. That smile. The casual calm of it. Not mocking, not monstrous, just inevitable. "She's not chasing you," Casey finally said. "She's becoming you." Jonah nodded, jaw clenched. "I know. She wears people. Not just their faces, their regrets. She pulls from what hurts, what hides. That's how she finds her way in." Jonah didn't answer. He was too busy holding his thoughts in a vice grip, afraid that if he let even one slip, one name, one memory, one fragment, he'd see another version of it walking behind him. "She showed me my daughter once," Casey said after a long silence. Held her hand out, asked if I wanted to see her again. I almost said yes. "What stopped you?" I remembered my daughter had never existed. Jonah shot him a look. Casey shrugged. "She made me invent someone just so she could steal her. That's how good she is at wearing pain." Jonah felt sick again. It was after midnight when they reached the woods. Not just any woods. The woods. The ones Jonah had filmed in for his very first unsolved series, the Lakeborn girl case. A missing 10-year-old. No leads. No suspects. Just that mirror. He hadn't thought about it in years. Didn't want to. But as he stepped under the canopy of twisted branches and entered the clearing where it had all started, the memories flooded in like a ruptured dam. The mirror was still there, right where they'd left it, propped against a tree at an awkward angle, its edges chipped, the center webbed with a long, diagonal crack. Jonah stopped 10 feet away. It hadn't aged. Not a day. The vines around it had grown the moss thicker, but the glass, flawless, untouched, still cold, still patient. He felt it before he saw it, something stirring behind the reflection. Not movement, not yet, but pressure. Like someone standing just on the other side of the glass, leaning in, their breath fogging up the inside. "She used this," Jonah whispered. "This is where she first reached through." Casey nodded. "She feeds on eyes. Not just seeing, witnessing. That's why mirrors matter." That's why recordings make her stronger. You gave her your attention. She used it as a hook. Jonah stepped closer. His reflection didn't match. It blinked a second too late. Breathed when he didn't. He crouched near the base of the mirror and cleared the dirt away. That's when he saw it. A small symbol carved into the bark of the tree behind the mirror. A circle within a triangle, surrounded by jagged lines. And below it, a date. July 6, 1991, long before Jonah had ever set foot here. Long before the missing girl. "What is this?" he asked. Casey crouched beside him. "That's a containment mark. One of the old ones. Someone tried to trap her here." Jonah felt his pulse rise. "Then who broke it?" Casey looked at him. Jonah's stomach turned. "No." Casey's voice was soft. "You're filming. The lights. The sound. The mirror moving. You weren't the first to find it. But you were the first to activate her again." Jonah stood up, pacing. "I didn't know. I didn't mean. You fed her, Jonah. You didn't know her name, but you showed her face to 500,000 people." He staggered back a step, like the guilt had weight. "Then I let her out." Casey didn't argue, because there was no denying it now. Jonah had opened the gate, and now he had to close it. "I have to go in," he said. Casey looked up sharply. Into the mirror. "She's in there. A part of her. Maybe all of her. Whatever I didn't burn, whatever crawled out of Evelyn, it's in here. I can't run from it. I have to look it in the eye." Casey pulled something from his coat. "A piece of black cloth? Cover it until the second you're ready. Don't let her trick you early." Jonah nodded, hands shaking as he wrapped the mirror, then dug into his pack for his notebook. It was different now. More pages than it used to have. He flipped through them, finding a new page with fresh writing. Writing he didn't put there. "Tio Conte Ma Shar. Know her name. Know your name. Cut the reflection. Bleed without breaking. Close your eyes but see her still." Jonah read it again. Every word sat heavy, like a riddle written by someone who'd already lost. He turned to Casey. "You coming with me?" Casey shook his head. "I'd just be another doorway. Another skin for her to wear. This is your shadow." Jonah crouched in front of the mirror, unwrapped it, and saw her. Not Evelyn. Not entirely. This version was different, wearing his mother's face, but the skin was cracking. His sister's voice, but the tone was wrong. A chorus of regrets stitched together into something that almost felt familiar. "Say my name," Jonah whispered, and she leaned closer, lips parting. "Say it," he snapped. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out, because she didn't know it. Jonah breathed deep. Then, with one sharp motion, punched the mirror. Glass shattered around his hand, slicing through skin and knuckle. Blood ran fast, bright, wetting the dirt. The wind died, the forest exhaled, and the mirror went black. Not broken, not empty, just closed. He fell back, clutching his hand. Casey rushed to him, pressing cloth to the wound. "I didn't hear her voice," Jonah said, gasping. "She's weaker," Casey replied. "You took away her name. You rejected her memory." Jonah nodded, vision swimming. "It's not over." "No," Casey agreed. "But it's a start." And somewhere, behind the trees, a whisper slithered between the branches. "You forgot this piece." Jonah's bleeding hand throbbed with a pulse that didn't feel entirely his. Each heartbeat sent a small shock through his arm, like something inside the wound was trying to answer back. Casey tightened the cloth around the cut, but Jonah barely felt the pressure. His focus stuck on the sound drifting through the woods. "You forgot this piece." Not loud, not near, but impossibly close, like the whisper had traveled through the trees, the dirt, even through his own bloodstream. Casey didn't move. He just slowly lifted his head, eyes narrowing toward the tree line. "She shouldn't be able to talk right now." Jonah swallowed. "I cut the reflection, and it silenced the part that was wearing your face." Casey's voice dropped. "But she's made of pieces. She hides what she doesn't want you to find." Jonah stood, legs unsteady. The mirror at his feet had turned black. No cracks, no shimmer, no reflection. It lay flat against the trunk like a dead screen. Its surface didn't even show moonlight. Casey kept glancing at it as if it might start breathing. "Where's the rest of her?" Jonah asked. Casey gave a bleak laugh. "Inside you, inside me, inside the ones who've seen her. She breaks herself into fragments and waits. When enough people remember, she becomes whole," Jonah finished. Casey nodded grimly. "And she's close." Jonah's breath turned shallow. "We have to find the missing girl. The one from this case. She started everything." Casey shook his head. "No. She was just the first victim. The first one to give Evelyn shape." Jonah closed his eyes hard, trying to steady the spinning in his head. "Evelyn said she wasn't the monster. She was trapped. And she might still be," Casey said. "Or what's left of her. You saw it. You pulled her hand from the freezer. That wasn't a trick." Jonah nodded, remembering the real girl's eyes under the glass. Scared, begging, alive. Some part of Evelyn was still human, still fighting. Casey checked the tree line again. "Jonah, what did you forget?" The words sank in Jonah's stomach like a stone. He wasn't sure. Then he felt it, like a memory trying to surface. A pressure behind his eyes. Something old. Something he had pushed away so hard that the pushing itself had created a hollow. "I don't know," Jonah whispered. "It's like it's hiding behind my thoughts." Casey stepped closer. "She said you forgot a piece. That means you left something out. Something she's counting on. Something tied to the first case." Jonah felt his pulse quicken, his breathing turn sharp. The edges of the woods grew darker, like shadows stretching toward them. "She's getting stronger," Casey muttered. "We need to move." They started walking deeper into the forest, the opposite direction from the mirror. The trees immediately felt wrong. Too still, the air heavy. Jonah's senses tightened, as if something inside the woods were pressing against his mind. He kept his injured hand close to his chest, holding the cloth tight. He didn't want to look at it again. He feared he'd see eyes staring back from the wound. Casey scanned the forest with cold, practiced tension. "There's a rotted cabin north of here. Saw it years ago. Hunters found a girl's shoe inside. Maybe that's the one from your case." Jonah followed, but something told him the cabin wasn't their destination. Not really. They'd walked 10 minutes when Jonah felt it. A tug. Small. Sharp. A magnetic pull deep in his chest, dragging him slightly left. He slowed. Casey noticed. "You feel something?" Jonah nodded. "Where?" Jonah didn't trust his voice. He simply pointed. Toward the darkest section of woods. Casey's jaw tightened. "Of course it's that way." They stepped off the trail and into thick brush. The forest grew denser, squeezing them inward, the branches forming a crooked rib cage around them. Jonah felt the air cool as if they were descending underground, though the ground beneath their feet didn't dip. Then, Jonah saw it. A wooden post, weathered, half swallowed by vines, and on that post a single shoe, small, red, dirty. Jonah's stomach dropped. "That's hers." Casey crouched. "Let me check." But before he touched it, Jonah saw something carved into the post. Letters, barely legible through mold and age. "I'm sorry." His breath hitched. He stepped back. "No," he said softly. "No, that's not right." Casey looked up. "You recognize it?" Jonah shook his head. "Not the shoe. Not the girl. The writing." He turned slowly, his gaze drifting through the trees. "I wrote that," he whispered. The forest held its breath. Casey stood quickly. "Jonah, I wrote that," Jonah said again. His pulse hammered. "I carved that years ago. I came back after filming. Alone. I don't remember why." His throat tightened. He did remember. A figure in the woods. A child's sob. His flashlight beam searching. A tree with a red shoe hanging from it. "Something told me to leave," he said. A voice. Not hers. Not Evelyn's. Something older. Something deeper. I was scared. I carved "I'm sorry" because I thought leaving was the wrong choice. I thought the voice was a warning. Casey exhaled slowly. "You were right to leave." Jonah's voice cracked. "No. Leaving broke the mark. The symbol on the tree behind the mirror. Someone carved it to keep her contained. My carving, my apology, cut through it. Casey froze. Realization snapped through him like winter lightning. You undid the seal. Jonah nodded, shaking. I opened the door. Not at the Bellamy house. Here. Years ago. And I didn't even remember. The whisper returned, closer now. You forgot me first. Jonah spun. At the edge of the clearing stood a girl. Not Evelyn, not the hollow, the missing girl. The one from the old case. Her skin was pale. Her eyes empty. Not cruel, not hollow. Just surrendered, and stitched across her mouth. Not thread, not wire. Something organic, veins, growing into her skin. Jonah choked on his breath. No, no, you're dead. Her head tilted slowly. No, she whispered. The sound came through the stitches like a sigh from inside a coffin. Then she lifted her hand and pointed, not at Jonah, at something behind him. Casey turned. His face drained of color. Jonah turned too, and his heart stopped, because standing behind him, wearing his face, was Jonah. Another Jonah, grinning, skin too pale, eyes too wide, voice too soft. You didn't forget the piece, the double murmured. You buried it. Jonah stumbled back. Casey drew a knife, ready to strike. But the double didn't move. He just watched Jonah with patient, endless certainty. You buried me, he said. I was the first part she took. Jonah shook his head violently. No, I don't. You were 13, the double said. Your mother had just died. You came here, alone. You stared into the mirror. You saw me, broken, scared. You left me behind. Jonah's knees buckled. The world tilted. Casey looked between them, horrified. You saw her when you were a kid. Jonah couldn't breathe. The double stepped closer. Evelyn wasn't the first, he whispered. I was, and behind him, behind them all, the trees began to hum. A low, rising sound. Like something massive waking up beneath the roots, pushing upward. Jonah realized. The forest wasn't a forest, it was a cage. And he had been unlocking it his entire life. Jonah could hear the hum in his teeth. It wasn't just sound. It was resonance, vibrating through the ground, his boots, his bones. The trees shivered, as if remembering what they were built to guard, their branches bowing and twisting unnaturally. The humming came from below, deep beneath the soil, where no man had ever walked, where no roots should grow. But the earth was swelling now, breathing. Something had stirred it awake, and Jonah knew it was him. His other self, the double, the first fragment, stood barely 10 feet away, arms relaxed. Head tilted in that uncanny way Evelyn had always done. His smile wasn't wide or sharp. It was worse than that. It was understanding. As if this version of Jonah knew every thought before he had it. Every crack in the foundation. Every inch of doubt. You left me behind. The double said again, quieter this time, like it was something sacred. And that's when she found me. Or maybe when I found her. Casey raised his knife again, stepping between the two of them. We burn it now, he said. The shoe, the tree, the ground. It's all a gateway. This is the oldest part. This is where she anchored herself. Jonah didn't answer. He was staring at the girl, the first girl. She hadn't moved. Still pointing. Still weeping through the stitches that bound her mouth shut with those pulsing, living veins. Her eyes weren't hateful. Just tired. So tired. She wasn't a monster. She wasn't even a memory. She was a warning. The soil cracked. It didn't just split. It peeled, like something was sloughing off a scab beneath the grass. Thick, black roots surged upward, wet and knotted, coated in something that shimmered like oil. The hum turned to a low roar, and the trees around them bent inward in a circle, forming a ring. No, a trap. We need to go, Jonah said, panic rising. We're not stopping her here. No, Casey muttered. We're too late. Because from the rupture in the soil, something began to rise. Not fast, not dramatic. But inevitable. It had no face. Not really. Its head was shaped like one, rounded and wet, with a hint of features that never finished forming. Skin the color of fog. Long limbs that moved like roots untangling, and embedded all along its arms and torso were reflections. Shards. pieces of glass, of metal, of eyes. And in each one, Jonah saw a different version of himself. In one, he was screaming. In another, laughing. In another, sitting on the floor, eyes dull, rocking slowly back and forth. Every version looked back at him, all of them smiling. "She's building herself from you," Casey whispered, layer by layer, reflection by reflection. The double stepped forward. "She doesn't need to hunt anymore. Not when you bring her pieces willingly." Jonah couldn't look away. "How do I stop it?" "You don't," the double replied. "You merge. You accept what you left behind, what you denied. Only then can she be contained again." "No," Casey said, turning to Jonah, wild-eyed. "That's her. That's what she wants. It's bait. You join with her. You disappear. You become part of the hollow. You become another mask." The ground shook again. The thing rising from the soil twisted its limbs and turned toward Jonah, not to attack, to invite. Jonah backed away. "There has to be another way." Casey grabbed him. "There is. Fire, salt. Bury the root. Destroy the memory. You erase her." Jonah looked at the girl, the stitched one. Her eyes pleaded silently. He looked at the double. Calm, still. And then he looked down, at the shoe on the tree. The one that had started it all. There on the toe, a small symbol had been carved. A triangle. A circle inside it. Jagged lines. The same seal that had once been behind the mirror. The same design someone else had carved before him. "I didn't break the seal by carving the apology," Jonah whispered. "I broke it by moving the shoe." That's what opened it. He turned to Casey. "You said she needs memory to grow, right?" "Yeah. Then what if I give her one she can't digest?" Casey frowned. "What do you mean?" Jonah stepped toward the girl. He dropped to his knees. He whispered something. Not to her, but into the earth beneath her feet. Words he hadn't said since he was 13. His mother's last words. "Live. Not remember? Live." The girl's eyes widened. A spark flickered behind them, and the stitches snapped. She gasped. Her first breath in years rasping from her mouth like air escaping a coffin. The towering creature shrieked, its faceless head twisting toward her. Its arms reached forward.
Casey yelled, "Jonah, move!"
But Jonah didn't move. He reached for the girl's hand, and she took it. The world buckled. Not the earth, not the sky. Reality. The forest blinked. The trees reversed. The hum stopped. And the creature dissolved into light. Not darkness, not ash, but memory. Raw and bleeding and real. Casey shielded his eyes. Jonah didn't. He looked into every version of himself. Every broken mirror. Every sin. Every silence. Every face he had buried. And he said one word. No. The light snapped inward. A sound like shattering glass filled the forest. And then silence. Total. Breathless. Honest. The clearing was empty. The tree stood alone again. The shoe was gone. No girl. No double. No Casey. Just Jonah. On his knees. Alone. And far away, a mirror cracked. Not from damage. From release. But something still remained in the back of his mind. A faint whisper. Not from Evelyn. Not from the hollow. From something older. He remembered too well. The forest was still. Not just silent, but still. As though the very air had gone rigid. As though time itself were caught holding its breath. Jonah remained on his knees, staring at the spot where the stitched girl had stood, where his other self had vanished, where the creature made of mirrors and memory had dissolved into light. The moment was over, but nothing felt finished. His hand throbbed again. Blood still crusted along his fingers, the cloth long soaked through and dark. He didn't remember when Casey had vanished. One moment he was shouting, swinging that knife, trying to hold back something that couldn't be touched, and the next gone. No sound, no farewell. Not even a footprint to mark his absence. It was like he'd never been there at all. Jonah rose slowly, legs trembling. The trees, once bent and leaning, now stood straight and lifeless, their branches draped like limp arms. There were no birds, no insects, not even the faint rustle of leaves. The clearing felt hollow, like a room stripped of its furniture, waiting to be repurposed. But Jonah felt no peace, no victory. Just wait. Because something was still with him. It crept at the edge of his vision. Not in the trees, not in the shadows, but in the corners of his thoughts. And the worst part, it didn't feel foreign. It felt familiar. Not like an invader, but like a long, lost part of himself had finally come home, and he wasn't sure he liked what it brought with it. He turned slowly, surveying the area. The post where the shoe had once hung still stood, the carving of his apology faded but not erased. He approached it, brushing his fingers along the words. "I'm sorry." The bark flaked off under his touch. He wasn't sure who the message had been for anymore. The girl, his younger self. Or maybe for whatever thing had been inside him all these years, the seed that had been watered by guilt and nurtured by fear until it grew into something with a name and a face. The name. Jonah's breath caught. He had never heard her name. Not the Stitch Girls. Not the one Evelyn became. She had been known only by what people called her. The hollow. The mouthless. The girl in the glass. But not once had he heard her true name. And yet now it whispered at the back of his skull. He turned away from the post and began walking. No path, no direction, just deeper. He didn't know what he was following, but it tugged at him from somewhere below. Not physically, something older than instinct. He walked until the light changed, until he found the hole. It was subtle, almost invisible. A depression in the ground no more than 5 feet wide. The leaves around it were undisturbed, but Jonah could feel the emptiness beneath, like a cyst under the skin. He crouched, brushing the debris aside. There, beneath the leaves, was a trapdoor, wooden, ancient, marked with scratches, symbols. One of them was familiar, the circle and the triangle, but the others were different. Older, worn down by time and rain. He hesitated. This felt like the real origin, not the Bellamy house, not the mirror in the woods. This was the mouth, the true beginning. He opened the trapdoor. The hinges shrieked. The kind of sound that felt like it scratched something behind your ears. Beneath, a stairwell spiraled downward into thick, unnatural darkness. He took 1 step. 2, and the air changed. It smelled like rot and smoke, like something had been burning down there for years and never fully died out. Jonah descended. The wooden stairs gave way to stone. The walls narrowed. The further he went, the less light reached him, until it was just his breath and the sound of something waiting. Then, faint light, a chamber, circular, built from ancient stone, its walls lined with mirrors, cracked, tilted. Some were whole, others missing chunks, but each one shimmered faintly, like water beneath the surface of glass. And in each reflection, Jonah saw her, but not always the same way. In one, she was a child, sitting cross-legged, staring forward. In another, she was hanging by her wrists, mouth sewn shut, eyes empty. In a third, she stood behind Evelyn's body, like a puppeteer hidden behind a curtain. She was everywhere, but not whole, not yet. In the center of the chamber, a well, shallow, dry. Jonah stepped toward it, and saw his own name carved into the rim. Gonah. Below it, another name, faded, obscured. He brushed away the dirt. It read Adiel. He froze. His mother's name. He backed away, breath hitching. Then, movement. From the mirrors. Each version of the girl turned, slowly, deliberately, to face him. Their heads tilted in unison, and they spoke, not from mouths, but from the glass itself. "You buried me when you buried her." Jonah's mind reeled. No, she was sick. She died in the hospital. I was there. I watched. You watched the body, not the soul. The chamber shivered. She came here, the voices whispered, to hide the pain, to forget what she saw, and she found me. Jonah remembered the sleepless nights after her death, the way her eyes lingered too long on shadows, the way she whispered into her bedroom mirror. He thought it was grief. He thought it was madness. But maybe it was a trade. She gave you her memories, Jonah said. She gave me a shape. The mirrors cracked, and something climbed out of the well, a girl pale. Stitch mouthed. But her eyes were his mother's, and she wept without sound. As Jonah backed away, the mirrors continued to crack, voices rising like a storm. You buried her, but you kept me, Jonah screamed. Because the girl wasn't a monster. She was a grave marker. A tombstone built from everything his mother couldn't carry. And he was the one who sealed it shut. Jonah couldn't scream anymore. The sound lodged in his throat, stifled by a sudden pressure that wrapped around his chest like iron bands. The chamber seemed to close in, every stone pulling tighter, the air thickening with a damp weight. The girl, his mother's eyes in that stitched face, stood silently by the well. Her presence didn't feel evil, but it was worse than that. It felt like truth. And truth, Jonah was realizing, was far more terrifying than any monster. The mirrored reflections had gone still again, but their silence pulsed like the pause between lightning and thunder. The glass crackled under their surface, like something was inside, pressing outward. Jonah took a step back, then another. But the girl moved with him, not walking, not floating. She slid across the stone like she was made of smoke and sorrow, the sound of her motion like wet paper tearing. Her stitched mouth twitched. Not a smile, not a grimace, something closer to pleading. Jonah's voice broke when he finally found it. What are you? The answer came not from her, but from all directions at once. We are what remains. The chamber responded to the words. The temperature dropped sharply, his breath now visible in the air. Behind him, the stone wall let out a subtle groan, as if the entire place had shifted. He looked down at the well. Still dry, still shallow, but the darkness inside it churned now, like a sea pretending to be empty. You weren't a spirit, he muttered, stepping closer. You weren't a ghost, you were built. From pain, from silence. The girl didn't answer. She only reached up and tugged, ever so gently, at one of the stitches at her mouth. Jonah flinched. Another stitch snapped. There was no blood. Only a faint wisp of smoke that curled out of the open seam like breath on a winter morning. He remembered the day his mother died, more than the sterile hospital room. More than the white sheets, he remembered what she said. Except, no, that wasn't right. She didn't speak at all. She opened her mouth, and Jonah heard something. But no lips moved. No words formed. He had forgotten that moment for years. Now it came rushing back in full. A whisper that wasn't a whisper. A name that wasn't hers. He stumbled back from the well. His knees hit the stone. Hands scraped against the floor, reopening the wound in his palm. He barely felt it. She gave you her voice, he said. Her silence. She fed you herself. The stitched girl began to cry. It was silent, just like before, but Jonah could feel the emotion radiating from her like heat. She wasn't just sad. She was grieving. For herself, for him. For everything they'd both forgotten. Behind her, the mirrors started showing things again. Not reflections. Memories. One by one. Jonah as a child, sitting in front of his mother's mirror, touching the glass, and whispering things he no longer remembered. His mother sitting behind him, watching, but never stopping him. A man he didn't know standing at the edge of the woods, hammering a triangle into a tree. A girl, one of the early victims, screaming into a reflection, the sound swallowed before it ever left her throat. A flickering VHS recording from a camera Jonah hadn't used since college, showing an empty hallway that didn't stay empty. A woman, Evelyn, alive, younger, writing on the walls of a basement Dio na krubahake. Dio nautis pie karanam. Tiamararananayoras. Jonah staggered to his feet. He turned to the girl, his voice trembling. What do you want from me? This time, the stitched girl raised her arm and pointed upward. Not at him. At the ceiling. Jonah followed her finger. He hadn't noticed it before. There, above the well, was a slab of glass, circular, inset into the stone, framed by the same markings he'd seen at the Bellamy house. The same ones on the tree, the seal, but the center had a small crack. Thin, deliberate. He stepped beneath it. The mirrors around him flickered wildly now. Jonah heard them whispering names. Thousands of names. Some he recognized, Most he didn't. Each one scratched into his ears like nails across slate. Then, all at once, they stopped. He looked up. The girl was gone. So were the mirrors. So was the well. He was alone in an endless black space, standing on what felt like stone, breathing air that smelled like rain after fire. He wasn't in the chamber anymore. He was inside the seal, and he wasn't alone. A figure sat across from him in the dark. No face, just a shape, as if someone had carved a person from shadows and draped it in skin that didn't fit. It raised its head. "You never meant to break me," it said. Jonah recognized the voice immediately, his own. "But you looked," the thing continued, "and you filmed, and you told others. And now, its head tilted, just like his reflection always had. I have enough to be real." Jonah shook his head. "You're not me. You're not her." The thing leaned forward. "I'm everyone you buried." It raised its hand. And behind it, hundreds of faces emerged in the dark. The stitched girl, Evelyn, his mother, the missing girl from the first case, the double, all of them, watching, waiting, expecting. "What do I do?" Jonah whispered. "How do I stop you?" The creature's grin widened, though its face had no mouth. "You already started. You spoke the name. You followed the memory. You opened the door. Now its fingers tapped against something invisible. You only need to give me the last piece." Jonah staggered back. No, he turned. But there was no exit. Just more darkness. The thing stood up. "You know what it is." Jonah covered his ears, but the words still came, crawling into his head like a worm. One word. His real name. Not Jonah. Not the name he used for filming, for fame. The name his mother whispered the night she died. The one only she knew. And as it echoed through the blackness, Jonah fell to his knees. Because he realized that was the piece he'd forgotten. And the hollow had never needed to find it. Because it had always belonged to her. The name thundered through Jonah's mind with the force of a storm tearing through locked doors. It wasn't spoken aloud. At least not in the way sound usually worked. It didn't travel through the air. It unfolded from inside him, like it had been waiting beneath layers of thought and denial, wrapped in silence. A name whispered once at the edge of sleep, cradled in grief, then buried so deep even memory couldn't dig it up. But the hollow had, not with teeth, not with claws, with patience. The black around Jonah began to bleed color, not light, not vision, but emotion. Every shade of shame he'd ever known. The purples of silence, the reds of rage, the deep voids of regret. Faces hovered in that space, not speaking, just remembering him. Evelyn, the stitched girl, his mother. The reflection that wasn't a reflection. Even Casey, flickering in and out like a failed signal. And still, the name pulsed. The child version of Jonah sat at the center of this collapsing reality, hugging his knees, staring into nothing. That version looked up slowly as the present day Jonah approached, his eyes wide, wounded, and somehow older than Jonah's own. "You were supposed to protect me," the child said. Jonah opened his mouth to argue, to justify, but the words died before they could leave. "You gave me away," the boy added. "I forgot," Jonah said. "I was scared." "You chose to forget." The boy stood. The mirrored void around them shifted. The chamber from before returned, but twisted now, melting and stretching like it had been dipped in heat. The girl with the stitched mouth reappeared, standing beside the well, her fingers tracing the rim where the names had been carved. Except now there were more. Too many. 100 names, none of them familiar, all of them burned in angry, uneven letters. Victims. Witnesses. Jonah didn't know. But his own name was growing, letter by letter, into something else entirely. Twisting, cracking, becoming hers. The hollow had never wanted to replace him. She wanted to be him, because he was the one who filmed. He was the one who watched. He was the one who fed her to the world. And in doing so, he'd surrendered a part of himself. A piece she was now ready to claim. The stitched girl turned. Her mouth had come unsewn entirely now, gaping and red, lips trembling as if the first real scream in decades was trying to claw its way out. But no sound came. Jonah turned to the child version of himself. "Help me, please." The boy stared at him for a long time, then reached out. Not to touch, to point. Jonah followed the line of his finger. To a mirror. The first one. The one from years ago, the one from the woods. But now it stood upright, glowing faintly. Its surface shimmered with something more than light, intent. Jonah stepped closer. His reflection was missing. Instead, the hollow stood in his place, not as a monster, not even as Evelyn, but as him, clean-shaven, wounded hand, tear-lined face. She didn't mimic his expression. She wore it. And when her mouth moved, it wasn't mockery. It was ritual. She said the name again. His true name. And Jonah remembered everything. His mother, sitting at the mirror, whispering that name as tears rolled down her face. She wasn't grieving yet. She wasn't sick yet. She was afraid. Not of death, but of what she'd brought with her. Something she had carried since childhood. Something that lived behind her reflection, the same way it had now lived behind Jonah's. The hollow was never just a thing. She was an inheritance. Jonah stumbled back from the mirror, shaking. It started with her. The reflection nodded. She called you. She brought you in. She gave you me. The hollow's smile widened. Jonah fell to his knees. Then this was always going to happen. The stitched girl stepped forward. For the first time, she spoke aloud. "No, you can break it." Jonah looked up, stunned. "How?" She pointed at the mirror. "At her?" "No." She pointed again, through the mirror, at the darkness behind it. "You don't destroy her," the girl said. "You go where she can't follow." Jonah stood slowly. "Where is that?" The girl pressed her palm to his chest. "Where you never looked." It hit him like lightning. He had spent years digging into haunted places, broken people, unexplained tragedies, but he had never looked inside the one place that had been with him the entire time. His own grief. He had buried everything that hurt too deeply to touch. That silence, that refusal, was her doorway. He stepped toward the mirror again. The hollow in the reflection backed away, frowning. Jonah raised his hand. The mirror resisted his touch. He pressed harder. It began to ripple. Behind him, the stitched girl whispered, "Say it." Jonah looked straight into the glass. "I know your name," he said. The hollow's expression faltered. "And you don't know mine." He plunged his hand through the glass and pulled. The mirror shattered, exploding outward. Shards flew, but none cut him. They dissolved midair like snowflakes. The chamber collapsed into blackness, and then light. Not bright, just warm. Jonah stood in the hallway of his childhood home. No cameras, no haunted music. Just a mirror on the wall. His mother's mirror. She sat in front of it, brushing her hair, young, healthy, smiling. She turned to look at him. Jonah, he couldn't speak. She reached out, took his hand. "I kept her away for as long as I could," she said. "But I was tired. I'm sorry." He broke, fell to the floor, wept. She knelt beside him. "You don't have to carry her anymore," she whispered. "You've carried enough." Behind them, the mirror faded to black. No faces, no voices, just rest. Jonah opened his eyes. He was lying in the woods, not the chamber, not the trapdoor, the clearing, the real world. Sunlight filtered through the leaves. The air was clean, no humming, no reflection, just wind, just breath. And carved into the tree beside him, in fresh, clear letters, "You looked. You remembered. You lived." The sunlight filtering through the trees didn't feel real. It was too soft, too gentle, like the air had been holding its breath for years and was finally allowed to exhale. Jonah lay in the grass, eyes half open, chest rising and falling in slow, steady rhythm. No whispers, no shapes in the corners of his vision, no mirrors staring back, just the sound of birds, real birds, somewhere high above, and the crisp crunch of wind brushing through autumn leaves. He didn't know how long he stayed like that. Time had lost meaning inside the hollow's grip, and even now, the idea of clocks or hours felt foreign. But eventually, His limbs remembered how to move. He pushed himself upright, muscles sore in that deeply human way, not from terror or magic or some otherworldly force, but from being alive. Jonah stood, unsure what to expect. A part of him still braced for the girl with the stitched mouth to emerge from the shadows, for Evelyn to return with that blank expression and twisted smile, for his own reflection to bleed out of a nearby puddle. But none of it came. The woods were empty, normal, but not untouched. He glanced down and saw the tree beside him, the one with the shoe post. The bark had changed. No longer cracked or rotted, but still scarred. New carvings now covered its surface, though he didn't remember making them. 3 lines. You looked. You remembered. You lived. His fingers traced them without thinking. The words weren't a victory chant. They were a record. A warning. A price. He stumbled toward the edge of the clearing, moving slower than he liked, like walking after an illness. When he emerged onto the trail, the light brightened. The air warmed. And for the first time in what felt like years, Jonah allowed himself to think beyond the moment. What now? He couldn't go back to the Bellamy house. He couldn't explain what had happened. Not to the police. Not to his fans. Not even to himself. Still, he walked. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. It didn't matter. Eventually, he found the gravel road, and sitting on the hood of a beat-up sedan, arms crossed, knife resting in his lap, was Casey. Alive. Exhausted, but alive. Jonah stopped, staring. You're real. Casey gave him a sideways smile. As real as you are. Jonah almost cried. He moved toward him, stopped, then moved again. What happened to you? Casey slid off the hood. I woke up 10 miles east. Mud in my mouth. No memories. But I knew how to find you. Jonah rubbed his temples. She's gone. Casey didn't answer. I mean it, Jonah insisted. The hollow, whatever she was, whoever she became, she's done. Casey's eyes narrowed. You sure? Jonah paused. He wasn't. She's sleeping, he said at last. If she was ever truly a person, that part of her is gone now. What's left is memory. Fragments. She only had power because I fed her. Others fed her. Casey exhaled. But memories don't die, do they? No, Jonah admitted. But they can fade. He looked down at his hands. The blood was gone. The wound healed. But a faint mark remained, like the outline of a scar that hadn't broken the skin. It pulsed faintly when he thought too hard about her. About Evelyn. About the girl. About his mother. He shook it off. I'm not feeding her anymore, Jonah said. Casey nodded. Then we make sure no one else does. They drove in silence. Back roads and detours. No GPS. Just instinct. Jonah didn't ask where they were going. Casey didn't say. But the further they went, the more Jonah felt distance between himself and the weight he had carried. Like every mile peeled a layer off his back. Eventually, they reached a cabin. Not haunted, not marked. Just quiet. Casey handed him a small box. Jonah opened it. Inside the hard drive from his old camera. The one he used in the Bellamy house. The one with the footage. He stared at it. You want me to delete it? Casey shook his head. You need to. Jonah hesitated. What if someone already downloaded it? They didn't, Casey said. You never uploaded it. Jonah blinked. I didn't. Casey leaned against the porch rail. You tried. But every time, something happened. File corrupted. Audio missing. Or you just forgot. Jonah thought back. He remembered planning to upload it. Writing the title. Picking the thumbnail. But the actual upload. He couldn't remember pressing publish. She hadn't let him. Not because she was protecting him, but because she wasn't ready to be seen. Jonah plugged the hard drive into the old laptop sitting inside the cabin. He found the footage. Dozens of hours. The Bellamy house. The mirror. The girl. The cries. All there. And then he paused. One last file. Unmarked. He clicked it. And watched himself. On the floor of the mirror chamber. Sobbing. Talking to someone unseen. I know your name, the screen, Jonah whispered. And you don't know mine. He watched as his own hand reached through the glass. And then, static. The file corrupted itself as he watched. Deleted itself. Jonah smiled bitterly. He didn't need to delete anything. She already had. He shut the laptop. Later that night, they sat outside, fire crackling between them. No ghost stories, no theories, just two men in silence that wasn't hollow anymore. After a while, Casey broke it. There'll be others. Jonah didn't answer right away. Then I know. Other things, Casey went on, not her. But like her, the kind people ignore. The ones that feed on attention, on obsession, on pain. They're out there. Jonah stared into the fire. Then I guess we'll have to remember them. Before they remember us. Casey smiled. Jonah didn't. Because somewhere, faintly, in the back of his mind, beneath everything he thought he had healed, he felt something stir. Not her, but the echo of her. A mirror still waiting to be looked into. And he knew. The story wasn't over. It never had been. The night crept over the cabin like a living thing, thick and suffocating. Jonah lay awake on the cot, staring at the ceiling. The fire outside had died down to embers, leaving the room cold, hollow, but still alive with sound. Or maybe it was in his head. Every crack in the cabin floorboard, every groan of the timber, every distant rustle of the wind through the trees felt deliberate, like a message waiting to be deciphered. He couldn't sleep. Not anymore. Sleep wasn't a refuge. It had never been. Every time he'd closed his eyes, she had crept in through a crack he didn't know existed, reshaping the world, wearing faces, collecting fragments. Casey had fallen into a restless doze in the chair across from him. The knife lay within reach, just in case, but even that didn't feel protective anymore. Jonah's hands shook as he replayed the events from the past weeks. The Bellamy house, the first mirror, the stitched girl, the hollow. Every encounter had built toward this moment, yet he felt no closer to understanding, no closer to safety. The memory of the well, the trapdoor, the circular seal carved into the earth, pressed against his mind with the weight of inevitability. A sound made him sit up. Subtle. At first he thought it was the wind, a creak in the cabin siding. Then it became more deliberate, soft, deliberate footsteps padding across the room behind him. He froze. His muscles coiled tense. The hair on his arms rose. The silence in the rest of the cabin amplified the sound of the steps, each one punctuated with purpose, with intent. Jonah's heart slammed against his ribs as if trying to escape. "Who's there?" he whispered, voice barely audible. The steps stopped, a pause. Then the voice, soft, familiar, and impossibly close. "You can't hide from me anymore." Jonah's blood ran cold. Not Evelyn. Not the stitched girl. Not even the hollow in its original, fractured form. This voice, it came from inside him. Not his thoughts, not his memory, not a whisper in the darkness. It felt like a shadow pressed against the walls of his mind. He looked around the cabin, scanning every corner, every reflection in the darkened windows. There was nothing. Nothing alive. Nothing human. "You've carried the pieces," the voice continued. "You think you've healed, but they never leave. They wait, and they remember." Jonah's hands clenched in his lap. He understood now. Even after destroying the first mirror, the fragmented hollow, and even after shutting the doors to the memories, something lingered. A seed had been planted inside him, and though he had severed the surface threads, the root remained silent and patient, wrapped around his soul. He had thought he had contained her, contained them all, but the hollow had no need for mirrors anymore. It lived inside him, inside the memory of him, and every time he blinked, it saw. Every time he breathed, it followed. The room felt smaller now, walls pressing inward, shadows clinging to the corners. Jonah's pulse pounded in his ears, but it wasn't his heartbeat he was hearing. It was hers. Something inside that matched his rhythm, an echo in the dark that moved when he moved. Jonah swallowed hard. "What do you want from me?" The voice's reply was soft, almost gentle, yet every word cut through him like ice. You and everything you refused to see. You made me. You carried me. And now I remember." The firelight flickered, casting jagged shadows across the walls. Jonah turned instinctively toward the window, expecting to see movement, to see her standing there. No, not standing, emerging. But there was nothing. The night outside was ordinary, silent. The trees swayed in the breeze. Unaware of the hell Jonah carried with him inside, he looked down at his hands. Blood had dried, the wound healed, but beneath the skin, he could feel it, small, crawling like tiny sparks moving under his veins. A pulse, not his, something else. Waiting, watching. And then Jonah realized something terrifying. She had learned. The hollow didn't need mirrors anymore. She didn't need shadows, or recordings, or fragments in other people's minds. She was patient, silent, growing in the cracks Jonah had left inside himself. And if he let his guard down, even for a moment, she would reclaim him, piece by piece, memory by memory. He had survived the mirrors, the traps, the well, the stitched girl, the hollow itself. But surviving wasn't enough anymore. He had to understand. He had to see the edges of what he had buried inside himself, or it would come back, stronger, sharper, smarter. Jonah stood. His legs shook. He didn't look toward Casey. Didn't speak. Every instinct told him that whatever was in the cabin with him now was watching from the inside, not outside, not behind, not ahead, inside. He lit the small lantern on the table. Its flame wavered, throwing shadows across the walls that looked like fingers reaching from the corners. Jonah forced himself to breathe, to think, to stay present. He knew he couldn't run. Not anymore. There was no running left. The hollow, in whatever form it now occupied, was inside him. And tonight, in the stillness, it was remembering everything Jonah had buried. The first whisper came from the back of his mind. "You will remember me too." Jonah gritted his teeth. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He waited, and then another voice joined it. Not hers, not a memory, but a thought that had never belonged to him, reaching into him, pulling. "And the ones you love will remember too." Jonah swallowed. Something deep and cold slithered through him. He realized with a sick clarity. He had not just survived the hollow. He had carried it forward, and now it was waking. Jonah didn't move. Not at first. His body was rigid, every muscle locked in tension. His heart hammering in his chest like a drumbeat announcing the inevitable. The voices inside his head, the hollow, the stitched girl, fragments of Evelyn, echoes of his younger self, whispered in unison now. Not chaotic, organized, purposeful. He could feel them pressing against the edges of his thoughts, like shadows bending to the will of something older, patient and unrelenting. He rose slowly, every step measured, afraid to disturb the fragile silence that surrounded him. The cabin, once empty and still, now hummed faintly, a resonance vibrating through the floor, through the walls, through Jonah himself. He had learned, in his encounters with her, that the hollow didn't need doors, didn't need mirrors, didn't need reflections. She traveled in thought, in memory. In the cracks he had tried to seal in himself for decades, and now she was stirring. He stepped toward the window, peering out into the forest beyond. The moonlight shimmered across the leaves, silver and unreal, but he saw nothing. No figures, no movement. Yet the sensation of being watched was undeniable. It was as though the forest itself had eyes, trained and fixed on him. And he knew the truth. It wasn't the forest. It was the hollow. She had learned patience. She didn't need to rush him. She had waited for him to return to the quiet, to the stillness, to the moment when his guard was low. Jonah moved toward the table, fingers brushing across the worn wood, seeking something, anything, that might anchor him. His eyes fell on the lantern, its flame flickering weakly. It wasn't enough to illuminate the cabin fully, but it was enough to cast shadows across the walls. And those shadows, they were moving, not randomly. Slowly, methodically, like they were mimicking life that had once been in the room. A faint whisper brushed against his mind. "You can't hide from me anymore." Not spoken, not audible. It slid into him, curling around his thoughts, pressing against the corners of his memory. Jonah froze, hands tightening into fists. He couldn't tell if it was coming from the cabin or from inside his own skull. Probably both. He forced himself to breathe, slowly, deeply, one step at a time. The firelight reflected in his eyes, and for a brief, fleeting second, he thought he saw something in the corner of the room. A figure crouched, small and pale, stitched lips twitching, eyes wide. He blinked. Nothing. Shaking, Jonah moved to the door. Every step he took made the floorboards moan, warning him, whispering in their own way. He opened the door slowly and stepped into the hall. Darkness pressed around him, thick and suffocating. Yet he could see the faint outlines of the rooms beyond, like his mind was projecting them from memory. Then he heard the laughter, soft, low, almost childlike, but layered, many voices overlapping in a chorus that clawed at his chest. Jonah's stomach dropped. The hollow had learned to replicate sound now. Not mimicry, multiplicity. Every laugh was a fragment of himself, of Evelyn, of the stitched girl. The child, Casey, the first victims. All of them, all stitched together into one impossible sound. He backed toward the cabin stairs, every nerve screaming to flee, but he didn't run. He couldn't. He had learned that fleeing didn't help. She followed. Always. She had been inside him all along. Waiting, learning, growing. Jonah clenched his jaw. "I'm not afraid anymore," he whispered. The voices quieted, almost like they listened. Then the room shifted. The walls bent, impossibly, folding inward. Shadows poured across the floor like smoke, twisting and writhing, and from the darkness a shape began to emerge. Tall, faceless, limbs impossibly long. A presence he could feel before he could see. Not Evelyn. Not the stitched girl. Not even the hollow as he remembered her. Something older. Something patient. Something that had waited for him to remember before fully waking. Jonah backed against the far wall. The shape moved with him, gliding across the floor like liquid shadow. The air thickened heavy with the weight of all the memories he had buried, all the fragments he had tried to ignore. The first whisper came again. "You remember. You feed me. You bring me pieces. And now I awaken." Jonah pressed his palms to his ears, tried to block it, but it burrowed in deeper. Every memory, every regret, every name he had ever spoken or withheld surged into his consciousness at once. Then the stitched girl appeared, small, pale, silent. But she held something in her hands. A shard of mirror, jagged, glowing faintly with the light of 1,000 memories. Jonah's breath hitched. What is that?" She didn't answer. She raised the shard, and for a second he saw not her, not Evelyn, not Casey. He saw himself. Young, old, broken, fearful, angry. Every version of Jonah he had ever been, reflected in a single, sharp edge of glass. The hollow's voice echoed around him. "All the pieces you've buried, all the fragments you've denied, now belong to me." Jonah realized, with a cold certainty, that the only way to survive this time wasn't to fight, to run, or to hide. He had to face every fragment he had buried. Every memory, every regret, every shame, every secret. And somehow he had to do it before she could consume it all. Because if he failed, there would be no more pieces left to reclaim. Only her. And she would be whole. The moment Jonah saw himself in the shard the stitched girl held, something inside him cracked. It wasn't fear this time. It was recognition. Not of a face or a moment, but of a truth he had tried to run from every time he picked up a camera or chased a ghost. The hollow hadn't chosen him because he was weak. She hadn't been summoned by a ritual or trapped in a cursed mirror. She had found him because he was full of doors. Unlocked, unguarded, open to anything that offered purpose louder than his own pain. The stitched girl stepped closer, her eyes shimmering with something between sorrow and warning. She held out the shard. Jonah hesitated. That sliver of mirror didn't just reflect, it remembered. Whatever he saw in it wouldn't be a trick. It would be him, stripped of denial. He reached for it. The instant his fingers touched the shard, his body locked in place. His mind recoiled. And then it pulled him in. He wasn't in the cabin anymore. He was 12 again, standing at the edge of his mother's bed, watching her sleep, her face pale and still. Machines beeped softly beside her, keeping time with breaths she no longer took on her own. The mirror across the room, her mirror, was turned toward the wall, covered in cloth. His aunt had done it, telling him it was bad luck to let mirrors reflect the dead. But his mother wasn't dead. Not yet. He remembered this moment. He had uncovered the mirror, not out of defiance, curiosity, something deeper. He'd needed to see. He peeled the cloth back, and there she was. Except the reflection didn't match. In the mirror, she was sitting up, eyes wide, mouth stitched shut. He'd screamed. They told him later it was a hallucination, trauma, a child's fear tangled with grief. But it wasn't. That had been her first look at him. The hollow. She had peered through the dying breath of a woman already fading, and found a boy who didn't know how to mourn. He dropped the shard. He was back in the cabin, on his knees, breathing hard. The stitched girl was gone. The shadow, her, was closer now. No longer a blur, no longer faceless. She was wearing Evelyn's shape, but not fully, like a costume stretched too tightly. Her smile twitched unnaturally. "You remember now," she said. Jonah wiped blood from his nose. "I remembered enough." She tilted her head. "Then you know it's not just me." Jonah's heart dropped. "What?" She stepped aside, and he saw them, lining the cabin's walls. Figures, shadows. Dozens of them, men, women, children, familiar and not. All standing silent, all watching. "They're waking too," she whispered. "You weren't the only one who opened a door. You weren't the only one who fed me." Jonah stumbled back. "You said you wanted me. That I was the last piece." Her expression flickered. "You were the first. The rest followed your cracks. You called them. You gave them names. You told their stories. And now they remember too." He understood. Every video he made, every haunted place he explored, every name he whispered into a microphone. He had left the door open. The hollow wasn't a single entity anymore. She had scattered herself into all the fragments he'd uncovered, and now they were converging. "Why show me this?" he asked, barely above a whisper. "Because you're not just the witness anymore," she said. "You're the narrator." The figures around the room leaned in. Their eyes burned not with rage, but with recognition. "You know all the pieces," she said, "and now you have to carry the whole." Jonah turned to run. But the cabin wasn't a cabin anymore. The door led to another version of the Bellamy house, the hallway where Evelyn had disappeared, the forest clearing, the well, the sealed mirror chamber, all overlapping, all inside the same space. There was no way out, because the hollow had never been a place, never been a ghost. She was his map of grief, and he had drawn every corner. He turned back to her, to the stitched girl standing beside her now, hands empty. "What happens if I refuse?" Jonah asked. The stitched girl opened her mouth. Her voice came out hollow, broken. "Then we keep whispering until someone else listens." And Jonah knew they would, because people love stories. And once you hear a story like this, really hear it, it never leaves. It lingers. It waits. Until you pick up the mirror. Until you say the name. Until you start looking where you shouldn't. Jonah clenched his fists. "Then I'll carry it. I'll keep it here." The hollow smiled. That's what we always wanted. As the figures closed in, not to harm him, but to become him. Jonah felt the weight settle on his chest, not of death, not of fear, but of memory. All the fragments, the broken names, the forgotten rooms, all now inside him. And somewhere, far away, someone else pressed play on a video they shouldn't have found. And the story began again. Jonah didn't sleep that night. Sleep had become a fragile illusion, something meant for people who weren't carrying 100 dead voices behind their ribs. Instead, he sat on the cabin floor with his back against the wall, eyes fixed on the dark window. Not because something was out there, but because something wasn't. The silence was thick and unfamiliar, and the longer he sat in it, the more it felt like the eye of a storm. Every so often, the shadows shifted. Not in any natural way. They rolled just enough to make him question whether they were truly shadows at all. The cabin groaned around him, wood stretching, settling, or maybe resisting what it now held within its walls. He had taken it in. All of it. The hollow's fragments, the voices of the victims, the stitched memories of places and people that were never supposed to be remembered. It all lived inside him now, and it wasn't quiet. They didn't speak like ghosts. They didn't scream. They whispered in overlapping fragments, like wind hissing through broken windows, sometimes warning, sometimes accusing, sometimes begging to be heard. Jonah thought he might go mad if he kept listening, but he couldn't stop. If he tried to shut them out, they only got louder. It wasn't torment. Not exactly. It was need. They needed him to remember. Needed him to tell. He closed his eyes, and immediately he was back in the mirror chamber. Except this time, he was outside of himself, watching his own body pacing in circles, muttering, flinching at things unseen. The floor was littered with mirror shards, each one catching the dim light and flashing different scenes. The Bellamy house hallway, the tree with the shoe post, Evelyn's reflection laughing with its mouth closed. In the center stood the stitched girl. But something was wrong. She looked older now. Not physically, but the stitching had changed. New threads, longer scars, a deeper sadness in her eyes. She met Jonah's gaze. The real Jonah, not the one still pacing. And for the first time, she spoke with clarity. "You've kept me alive." He stepped toward her. "I didn't mean to." "But you did," she said. "When you remembered me. When you let them see me. When you said my name, even if you didn't know it." Jonah hesitated. "Then why am I still here? Why not finish it?" She looked past him. Jonah turned and saw a mirror in the wall that hadn't been there before. It wasn't cracked. It wasn't warped. It showed only one thing: the cabin. Present day. Jonah's real body sitting on the floor. Watching. Waiting. "I gave you the shard," the girl whispered. "You saw what you needed. But you haven't given it back." He stared. "The shard? Your truth," she said. "The one you saw. You're still holding it. That's why she won't leave." Jonah's hand instinctively moved to his jacket pocket. He hadn't noticed it before, but the weight was unmistakable. He reached inside and pulled it out. The mirror shard. Cold, sharp, and pulsing faintly with his heartbeat. "Drop it," the girl said. "Let her have it. Let it end." But Jonah shook his head slowly. "No, if I drop it, someone else will find it, just like I did. Just like Casey. Just like the people before me." She stepped back, her eyes narrowing. "Then she'll never stop. She'll wait. Until someone else listens." Jonah turned back toward the mirror. And suddenly, the reflection changed. It showed a child, not Jonah, a little girl, sitting on the floor of a bedroom, watching a video on an old laptop. Grainy footage. A man whispering into a camera, voice shaking. Talking about a house, a mirror, a woman with stitched lips. Jonah's voice. He staggered forward. No, the stitched girl's voice came again. Soft and certain. "You're not the last carrier. You're the first one who remembered. And now she's inside your story. In every version told, every retelling, every upload, every whisper." He clenched the shard tighter. The edge bit into his skin. Blood dripped, slow and warm. "If I destroy it," Jonah said, "what happens?" The girl didn't answer. Because she didn't know. Because no one did. That was the problem. He looked down at the shard again, and he realized something. It wasn't just a piece of the mirror. It was his reflection. Frozen. A moment in time where he chose silence. Chose fear. Chose to turn the camera off and pretend none of this was real. He could smash it. He could end his part in the story. But someone else would always pick it up. The hollow wasn't an entity anymore. She was a story. And stories never die. Not really. They change. They grow. They wait. Until someone listens. Until someone looks. Until someone tells it again. Jonah stared at the mirror. At the girl on the other side. Watching his video. mouth slightly open, eyes wide, and in that moment, he knew what he had to do. He raised the shard, not to destroy it, to speak to it. And for the first time, without fear, he said, "This is a warning. This story is not entertainment. It's not a game. If you're hearing this, if you're seeing this, you need to stop. Right now, before it becomes yours too." The stitched girl nodded once. The shard faded from his hand. The mirror cracked. Not shattered, just enough. And in the distance, a voice, so faint it could have been a dream, whispered, "Someone's listening." Jonah opened his eyes. He was back in the cabin, alone. Finally, truly alone. But he didn't feel relief, because the quiet was deeper now. And in that silence, he heard something he hadn't heard in a very long time. The sound of nothing watching. Just breath. Just the wind. Just the waiting. The cabin no longer creaked. It breathed. The wood didn't shift beneath Jonah's feet. It responded. Not in any violent, supernatural sense. That part had passed, or maybe it had retreated. This was subtler. Worse. Because now, every sound, every silence, every second of stillness felt like a question waiting to be answered. The hollow wasn't here anymore. Not fully. But that didn't mean she was gone. Jonah stood in the center of the room, hands shaking as he closed the old laptop and slid it back into the desk drawer. He hadn't filmed anything since the last time in the Bellamy house. The camera sat untouched in the corner, its battery long dead. The urge to document had died with it, or maybe it had been replaced by something quieter, the need to witness, not record. He moved to the small window overlooking the forest, the light outside soft and strange. Not night, not morning. That gray nowhere, time that felt like it didn't belong to any day at all. The woods stretched endlessly, still and watchful. He wondered how many others had walked through those trees before him, searching for answers they didn't understand, only to leave with pieces of themselves missing. Or worse, extra. He pressed his forehead to the glass. Cold. Real, he focused on that. On the physical. On anything that reminded him he still had a body, still had blood in his veins, still had choices. But that word echoed. Choices. That's what the hollow had really fed on, hadn't it? Not souls, not attention, not even memory. But the moment before the decision. The tension. The pull, the hesitation. That split second where you look in the mirror and decide whether to look away or stare harder. Whether to turn the camera off or keep recording. Whether to stay or flee. That pause was where she lived. That's where she waited. And now she was part of him. He could feel her moving in the places he used to ignore. In the moment before a thought fully formed. In the fraction of a second when he blinked and his mind filled in the darkness behind his eyelids. Not overpowering, not controlling, but present, like an old story half forgotten, itching at the edge of memory. The stitched girl's final words repeated again and again in his mind. Then we keep whispering until someone else listens. He hadn't realized how true that was until last night. She had become a kind of virus, passing not through flesh, but through story, through the retelling, the sharing, the whispering in dark rooms, in private corners of the internet, in videos accidentally stumbled upon. She spread through belief, through repetition, through people like him. He didn't know when the door opened. Only that it did. He didn't hear it creak, didn't feel the rush of cold air. But when he turned around, someone was standing there, Casey, real, solid, eyes bloodshot, clothes stained, face haunted. "You look like hell," Jonah said, voice flat. Casey gave a humorless laugh. "You're one to talk." Jonah stepped closer. "How long were you out there?" Casey shrugged. "A day. A week. I don't know anymore." "Did she follow you?" "No. But something did." Jonah swallowed. "It's spreading, isn't it?" Casey nodded slowly. "Not just online. In people. They carry it without knowing. They talk about the girl with the stitched mouth, the mirror in the forest, the video that disappears after you watch it. It's not even the same story anymore. It's worse." Jonah sat down heavily in the chair. What do we do? Casey leaned against the wall, staring out the window. We don't tell it again. Not like before. No videos, no uploads, no names. We bury it piece by piece. But we can't forget it, Jonah said. No, Casey admitted. But we don't have to spread it. There's a difference. Jonah rubbed his face. She wants us to share. That's the whole point. She turns pain into signal. Memory into infection. Then we go quiet, Casey said. Like the ones before us should have. We become the silence between the words. They sat there for a long time, neither speaking. Just breathing. Then Jonah stood. He crossed the room to the fireplace and reached into the old box beside it. Inside was the last tape. The one he hadn't dared destroy. The one he told himself he was saving in case he needed proof. He took it out, stared at the unmarked label, and threw it into the fire. It hissed once, then cracked, then melted into nothing. He felt her inside him shift. Not gone, but uncomfortable. Good. She didn't like being forgotten. He turned back to Casey. We stay out of sight. No contact. No trace. Casey nodded. And if someone starts digging? Jonah's voice dropped to a whisper. Then we stop them. Before she speaks through them too. Outside, the sky finally shifted. Morning, maybe. Or something like it. They stood together at the window watching. Not because they were afraid, but because they understood. Some stories don't end. They wait. And this one was waiting still. The following days passed like ghosts. Not loud or aggressive, just present. Lingering in the corners, brushing against skin, breathing when no one else did. Jonah stopped checking clocks. He stopped marking nights. The sun rose, but the sky never seemed brighter. He and Casey barely spoke. What could they say? Every word carried weight now. Every thought threatened to give the hollow shape. Even silence felt like a trap, a space where she could listen more closely. They adopted a rhythm. Chores, cooking, repairs to the cabin that didn't need fixing. Anything to keep their hands busy. It was strange, how the mundane could feel like protection. But they both knew the truth. They weren't building a shelter. They were preparing a grave. For her, for the story, for themselves maybe. It was Casey who finally broke the pattern. He stood on the porch, staring into the trees. Jonah watched from inside, sensing the shift before any words were spoken. She's not just waiting, Casey said quietly, almost to himself. She's listening. Jonah stepped outside. The wind was cold but soft, carrying the faint scent of pine and ash. You feel it too? He asked. Casey nodded. Something's pulling again. Not like before. Slower. Smarter. Like she's not trying to be seen, just heard. Jonah followed his gaze into the woods. The trees stood still. But there was a heaviness between them, like space had thickened, like stepping between trunks might feel like walking into water. Someone's telling the story, Casey said. Somewhere. Right now. Jonah didn't question how he knew. He felt it too. A tingling at the base of his skull. A hum behind his teeth. Like an invisible thread had been tied to his chest and was being pulled from the other side of the world. They stood like that for a while, both of them listening without ears. Both of them hearing the same thing, her voice, echoing through someone else's mouth. Jonah sat down on the edge of the porch. We can't stop people from remembering. No, Casey said. But we can stop them from spreading it. How? Casey was quiet for a moment. Then he said, we find them. The ones who speak softly. The ones who feel the pull, before it turns into a scream. Jonah turned to him. You want to hunt down the carriers. Not to hurt them, Casey said. To help them. Before it's too late. Before they become like us. Jonah laughed bitterly. And what are we exactly? Casey's voice was flat. The last line before the next infection. The idea made Jonah's skin crawl, but it made sense. The hollow couldn't possess everyone. She needed cracks, weaknesses, curiosity, people who already questioned reality, who already felt haunted. It wasn't random. She chose hosts, not victims. Jonah thought back to the girl in the video, the one he saw in the mirror vision. She hadn't looked scared. She'd looked entranced. just like he had been years ago. Okay, he said finally, but we don't confront them. Not at first. We watch. We wait. Casey nodded. We listen better than she does. Jonah stood. Where do we start? Casey pulled a folded paper from his pocket. A printout. Grainy screenshot of a forum post. Has anyone else seen the girl with the mouth like a zipper? I don't dream about her. I see her in reflections. Sometimes she smiles. Sometimes she waves. Last night she started whispering. I think she's learning my name. No usernames. No way to trace the location. Just an IP block from somewhere in Colorado. Jonah stared at it. The words crawled across the page like they were alive. This is how it starts, he whispered. Casey folded it back up, one thread at a time. Jonah looked around the cabin, their temporary refuge. Their quiet little cell. We can't stay here, he said. Not anymore. No, Casey agreed. But we can carry silence with us. That night they packed. Just enough to survive. Not enough to be noticed. And when they left, they didn't say goodbye to the cabin. They left it as they found it. Quiet. Watchful. Waiting. Because some places remember. And if someone ever stumbled across the burned remains of that old tape, or the warped metal of the destroyed shard, they'd feel it too. That pressure in the chest. That itch in the spine. The hollow doesn't scream anymore. She listens. She whispers. And she waits for someone to speak her name again. Jonah and Casey walked into the woods without turning back. No flashlights. No sound. Just two men carrying a weight that no one else could see. And somewhere, far away, a girl typed another post. I think I saw her again. But this time, she saw me too. 3 towns later, they found her. She wasn't what Jonah expected. Not someone fragile or obviously haunted. Not the trembling kind of person who would post cryptic warnings on forgotten forums or lurk in shadowed comment sections about urban myths. She was 17, maybe 18, sitting on a park bench in a dying Colorado town, drawing in a sketchbook that looked twice her age. Her hoodie sleeves were chewed at the edges, and her headphones didn't play anything. Jonah could tell because he watched her for hours, and not once did she press play. Casey had spotted the post 2 days prior, buried on an obscure message board. No images, no dramatic claims. Just a line, what do you do when the thing in the mirror waves first? It was the calm that scared Jonah most. No panic, no drama, just a question. That was how the hollow liked it now. She didn't need hysteria to spread. She needed curiosity. They followed the post to a public IP at a library 3 blocks away from the bench. Casey hung back near the parking lot. Jonah sat on the opposite end of the bench under the excuse of tying his boot. He didn't speak. Neither did she, but she watched him. From the corner of her eye, like she already knew why he was there. Jonah finally looked over and said, "You see her too?" The girl didn't flinch. She turned the page of her sketchbook. "She smiled at me yesterday," she said. "She was wearing my face." Jonah nodded slowly. "Did she speak?" "Not out loud," the girl replied. "But I heard her." "And what did she say?" The girl stopped sketching. She didn't look scared. Not exactly. But there was a weight in her eyes, something Jonah knew well. She said I would remember her when it matters most. Jonah's pulse picked up. That phrase, remember her when it matters most. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. The hollow planted memory like seeds. Then she waited. Waited for them to grow in silence. "What's your name?" Jonah asked. The girl looked at him finally. Her eyes were impossibly dark, not black, but deep enough that reflections got lost in them. "Does it matter?" she said. Jonah didn't push. That wasn't the point. This wasn't an interview. This wasn't a confrontation. He leaned back. "I used to think I could beat her. Then I thought I could bury her. And now," she asked. "Now, I think I'm supposed to remember her." The girl watched him for a long time, and then, slowly, she turned her sketchbook toward him. The drawing was a mirror, plain oval, simple frame. But the reflection inside wasn't her. It was Jonah, staring back at himself. But his mouth was stitched shut. A beat passed. and then the stitched mouth smiled. Jonah's breath caught. That wasn't memory. That wasn't suggestion. That was real. The girl flipped the page. The next drawing was of Casey, standing just out of frame, watching, waiting. She didn't know them, but she drew them. You're one of hers, Jonah said quietly. I don't think she belongs to anyone, the girl replied. She just waits for people to open the door. Jonah rubbed his face. He'd seen this before. Not exactly like this, but close. The hollow was testing a new pattern now, not fear-based, not mirror-based. Recognition. She wants you to spread it, he said, through drawings, through whispers, through people like me, showing up to try and help. The girl stood, tucking the sketchbook under her arm. I haven't drawn anyone else yet, she said. Only you two. Jonah's throat tightened. Then we're already part of her next story. The girl nodded once. I think that's why she smiled. She walked away before he could respond. Slipped into the park crowd, vanished like smoke. Casey approached a few minutes later, eyes hard. She know? Jonah nodded. Too much. Casey didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. They both knew what it meant. The hollow wasn't pulling from old stories anymore. She was writing new ones. Real time. No longer replaying tragedies. She was scripting them, casting them, setting the stage. And Jonah and Casey, they were either the audience or the opening act. That night, they found a motel on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just a bed and a door that locked. Jonah lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the fan overhead hum like a forgotten lullaby. He couldn't stop seeing the stitched smile, couldn't stop hearing that one line. You will remember me when it matters most. What scared him wasn't the phrase. What scared him was not knowing when that moment would come. Or worse, what would be waiting on the other side of it. The town felt colder the next morning, but not in temperature. It was the kind of cold that didn't settle on skin, but sank straight into bone. Quiet, insistent, unshakable. Jonah stood at the edge of the motel parking lot with his hands in his coat pockets, watching the trees sway without wind. There was something about the way they moved that reminded him of the stitched girl's mouth. Slow, deliberate, as if responding to some silent command only they could hear. Casey came up beside him, cup of gas station coffee in hand. You didn't sleep. Jonah didn't respond. He didn't need to. They both looked like they hadn't slept in days. I dreamed about her, Casey finally said. Jonah turned. Her or the girl from the park. Both, Casey said. But they weren't separate. Jonah stared. What do you mean? Casey took a sip, eyes fixed on the horizon. She wasn't being used. She was her. The hollow didn't crawl inside her like a parasite. She became it. Or maybe she always had it inside her. Like a dormant virus just waiting for someone to recognize it. Jonah's stomach turned, so we didn't stop anything. Casey shook his head. We walked into the next chapter. Jonah looked up at the sky, pale, washed out. Like the color had blood from it. I thought destroying the shard meant it was over. I thought, if I carried the memory, maybe she wouldn't need another. She doesn't need one, Casey said quietly. She wants many. They left the town without checking out. The girl had vanished. No new posts, no whispers on forums, nothing in the local news. But Jonah knew better than to believe that meant she was gone. When the hollow disappeared, it was never because she'd left. It was because she'd nested. And once she nested, she waited. They drove west for hours. Silent, static on the radio. Nothing felt grounded anymore. Casey finally pulled off onto a dirt road that led to nowhere. A place they hadn't marked on any map. Where are we? Jonah asked. Casey killed the engine. A house someone told me about. Long time ago, before I knew who she was. Before the Bellamy place. This was one of the first. Jonah stepped out. The air was still. Not quiet, just still. As though the trees were holding their breath. The house wasn't haunted in the traditional sense. No broken windows. No overgrown vines. It looked lived in, cared for even. But Jonah felt it the second he stepped near the porch. That hitch in the heartbeat. That wrongness behind the eyes. He turned to Casey. "Why are we here?" Casey looked down. "Because it started with you, but it doesn't end with me. We need to know what she is now, not what she was. If we can't stop her, we need to understand her." Jonah laughed bitterly. "You think this house holds answers? I think it holds her." The door wasn't locked. They didn't knock. Inside, the air was warmer than it should have been, thick with the smell of lavender and something else. Something too sweet to be natural. The house was empty, furniture intact, paint fresh. But every mirror had been removed. Clean rectangles on the wall where they'd once hung. Even the bathroom mirror was gone. Bolts still twisted into the wall like rusted eyes. "She lived here," Casey said. "The woman who first talked about the hollow. Before Evelyn. Before the stitched girl. This is her house." Jonah walked to the hallway. Family portraits lined the walls, but all the faces were scratched out. Not violently, carefully, as if the person removing them didn't want to destroy them, only erase their names. "She never told anyone what the hollow showed her," Casey said behind him. "Not in full. She just wrote, 'The smile doesn't come after the fear. It comes before.'" Jonah's blood went cold. "Why?" Casey stepped into the room. "Because that's how you know it's her." Jonah felt the presence before he turned. A shadow in the mirrorless wall, no face, no form, but a smile, soft, deliberate. And it wasn't fear he felt first. It was recognition. He knew her. Not from the Bellamy house, not from the Shard, not even from the stitched girl. He knew her because she'd been in the story the whole time. Shaping it, smiling through it, watching from behind the glass of every retelling. Casey moved without speaking, pulling an old box from the corner of the room. Inside were letters. Hundreds. Yellowed pages, hand written in looping cursive. Descriptions. Sketches. Names. Dates. They tried to warn people, Casey whispered. Every person who saw her, they wrote, but they didn't publish. They didn't upload. They preserved it, quietly. Jonah picked up a page. The ink was smudged, but the sentence stood out like a scream. "When she smiles, it's not because she's happy. It's because she's already inside." He dropped the page. Behind him, the room grew colder. Not air temperature. Memory temperature. She was coming again. Not to haunt, not to whisper, but to remind. That she was never just behind the mirror. She was inside the story, and every time it's told, every word, every drawing, every page, she smiles first. The letters wouldn't stop whispering. Jonah didn't hear them at first, not when Casey opened the old box, or even when they spread the yellowed pages across the floor like a cracked timeline. But sometime after sunset, as the walls of the house pressed closer, as the light in the corners grew thinner, the whispers began. Not with words, with cadence. The soft murmur of memory too faint to be language, but too pointed to be ignored. Each page had absorbed it, somehow, like the voices of those who had seen her bled into the ink itself. Casey had gone quiet, hunched over a stack of notes dated back to the early 70s. Jonah watched him for a while, then shifted his attention back to the letter in his hand. It wasn't signed. None of them were. Whoever had lived here, whoever had collected these fragments, had known better than to leave a name behind. She doesn't live in mirrors. That was never the point. Mirrors just hold the stillness long enough for you to notice her. The floor creaked beneath Jonah's feet. Not the usual sound of old wood, but something sharper, like breath held too long. He placed the letter down and pressed his palm against the floorboard beneath the chair. Cold. Colder than the rest of the room. He pressed harder, then knocked gently. Hollow. There was space underneath. He glanced at Casey, who had noticed. Wordless, Casey stood and moved aside the chair. Together, they pried up the board. Beneath was a small compartment, dust and darkness, and something else. Another box. This one was smaller. Wrapped in faded red cloth, bound with twine so tightly it had left indentations in the wood. Jonah hesitated before untying it. Are we sure? He asked quietly. No, Casey replied. But if it's still here, after all these years, maybe it's what they were afraid to look at. Jonah didn't reply. He undid the knot and opened the lid. Inside, there were only two items: a Polaroid photograph and a cassette tape. The photo showed the inside of this very house, the living room, but it was wrong. The furniture was skewed, the angles slightly off, like the room had been pulled at the edges. And standing in the corner, barely visible in the shadows, was a figure. Not the stitched girl, not Evelyn, not any version Jonah had seen before. Just a smile, no face, just a soft curve of lips in the darkness. A smile without context, a smile before fear. He turned the cassette tape over in his hand. No label, no markings. Just plastic and silence. He looked at Casey. I don't want to hear it alone, he said. Casey nodded grimly. We listened together. They found an old tape player in one of the closets, miraculously intact. Jonah clicked the tape into place, heart pounding. The air shifted the moment the play button clicked. It started with static. Then a voice. Female. Tired. Worn down to the bones of breath. If you're listening to this, you already know her. Or you think you do. But she doesn't want to be known. She wants to be felt. That's what we all missed. A pause. A crackle. She came to me through reflection. But she stayed through memory. I saw her first in my daughter's eyes, then in the gaps between my dreams. She isn't a ghost. She's what fills the quiet. Jonah and Casey sat frozen, the house holding its breath with them. I tried to burn the letters. I buried the mirrors. I erased the names. But she doesn't care about objects. She only cares about patterns. She's a shape that wants to be repeated. Then, silence. Not a fade out. Not a stop. Just cut off. Jonah stared at the tape deck. That's it, Casey shook his head. No. That's the beginning. They sat for a long time after that, neither one reaching for the tape, neither one willing to rewind it, because it had said too much, and not nearly enough. Jonah looked at the photograph again, the smile in the shadows. He knew that shape now. He'd seen it in every mirror that fogged at the wrong time, in every paused video that flickered just a moment too long. He'd drawn it once, by accident in a notebook during a layover, a curve so perfect it looked kind. But it wasn't. It was her signature. Not a scream, not a warning, just a smile, because she knew how the story ended. She was the ending. Jonah stood and walked to the wall where a mirror once hung. He traced the rectangle where its outline still ghosted the paint. She doesn't need reflections anymore, he said. She's using us now. Casey stood beside him. So what do we do? Jonah stared at his own faint reflection in the glass of the photo frame. Not enough to see clearly. Just enough to imagine. We rewrite the pattern, he whispered. And from somewhere deep within the floorboards, they both heard it. A sound like fabric tearing, or stitches loosening. And the smile, in the photograph, grew just slightly wider. The photograph lay face down on the floor, but Jonah could still feel it watching him. Not just the image, the memory of it. The smile, without a face, had rooted itself somewhere deep in the back of his thoughts, like a splinter he couldn't dig out. He kept catching himself glancing toward the empty spot on the wall where the mirror had once hung. There was nothing there. No glass. No reflection. Just paint, shadow, and the sound of silence growing too loud. Casey didn't speak for a long time. He just sat beside the old tape recorder, staring at the floor like it might open up and explain everything. The tape had said so little, and yet it had said everything. The hollow didn't need objects anymore. She needed repetition, shapes, gestures, words even. Not incantations, but rhythms. Jonah thought back to the first time he'd said her name out loud, and how the air seemed to twist slightly in response. Not because it was a curse, but because it was a reminder. She's not haunting houses, Jonah said finally, his voice hoarse from hours of not using it. She's haunting stories. She's feeding on the shape of the telling. Casey nodded, almost absently. And every time someone changes it, she adapts. She hides deeper, waits longer. Jonah rubbed his eyes. Then we're not just trying to stop people from repeating the same story. We're trying to stop them from reshaping it. Which is impossible. Casey muttered. It's what people do. You tell someone about something strange, and the next time they repeat it, it's already different. It's more dramatic, more marketable, more, he stopped. Entertaining. That word hit harder than it should have. Jonah stood up and began pacing the room, every board beneath his boots groaning in protest. She wants that. She wants the story to spread like a virus. Not because it's true, but because it's compelling. She wants to be passed around, reimagined, shared like folklore until there are hundreds of versions of her whispering in the dark. Casey looked up. And no one can stop that once it begins. It's already started. Think about it. The girl in the park. She didn't find the hollow. She created a version of her, and it still worked. She never needed the original, Jonah whispered, stopping mid-step. She just needed someone to want her badly enough. Someone to listen. They didn't need to say it out loud, but both of them were thinking it. Maybe they were the worst culprits of all. All this time, they thought they were documenting, investigating, trying to understand. But that was the hook, wasn't it? That's what made them perfect hosts. They wanted the story to make sense, to be told, even if they claimed it was a warning. Jonah turned slowly toward the box of letters, still spread across the floor. We need to burn them. Casey's eyebrows lifted. We don't even know who wrote them. Exactly, Jonah said. They've been left behind like breadcrumbs, like bait. If we found them, someone else could too. And the story starts again. Casey hesitated. Even if we do that, we're not erasing her. She's too deep now. She's in threads, sketches, rumors. You think a fire's gonna fix this? No, Jonah said. But it's the only thing we can do. We can't silence the world, but we can silence ourselves. Casey stood, his face unreadable. Then, without another word, he started gathering the pages. They built the fire in the yard behind the house. The sky above was moonless, as though even the stars had turned away. The paper burned fast, faster than it should have, curling into black ash and floating upward like a cloud of dying moths. Neither of them looked away. The last thing Jonah threw in was the photograph. He caught a final glimpse of that faceless smile just before the flames swallowed it. The curl of the lips, faint but deliberate. Not menacing, inviting. And in that moment, he realized something that chilled him deeper than anything he'd seen before. The hollow didn't smile because she was inside you. She smiled because she knew you would let her in. He sat by the fire until only embers remained. Casey had already gone back inside, muttering something about needing to check the doors, though Jonah knew it was just an excuse to be away from the smell of burning ink and memory. He stayed there a long time, long enough to notice the sound. It wasn't wind. It wasn't trees. It was breathing. He stood slowly, turning toward the forest beyond the house. Something was in the trees, watching, waiting, not approaching, just present. The way stories always are. He stepped forward once, then stopped. There was no shape, no figure, just that feeling, like the end of a sentence, or the start of a retelling. And then, louder, faint, familiar, not cruel, just knowing. Casey opened the door behind him, and the sound disappeared like steam. You okay? He asked. Jonah didn't answer right away. He turned back to the fading fire, watching the ashes rise. We've been asking the wrong questions, he said finally. It's not, how do we stop her? Casey waited. Jonah exhaled. It's what if we already told the wrong kind of story? And somewhere, just at the edge of hearing, the smile stretched wider. They left the house the next morning before the sun had fully risen, both of them too unsettled to stay another minute. Something about the fire hadn't burned clean. The smell had lingered in their clothes, clung to the air inside the house, made their skin feel coated in something they couldn't wash off. Ash, yes, but something more. Memory, maybe. Regret. Jonah didn't speak the entire ride out of town, and Casey didn't press. There was nothing to say. Not yet. The silence was thicker now, but it wasn't oppressive. It was necessary. They stopped at a roadside diner somewhere in the plains, a nowhere place with flickering fluorescent lights and a waitress who looked like she'd been awake since the 70s. Jonah ordered coffee and barely touched it. Casey didn't order anything. The booth creaked beneath their weight, but no one paid them much attention. That was the way it had to be now, unremarkable, forgettable. Ghosts pretending to still be human. She's gone quiet, Casey said after nearly 20 minutes. Jonah nodded. Too quiet. You think we heard the last of her? Jonah looked out the window, where the land stretched flat and dry, nothing on the horizon but sky. No. I think she's listening again. It was the pattern. Speak. Wait. Let the story take root, then shift, twist, and grow. The hollow didn't force herself onto people anymore. She waited for them to be curious. She waited for someone to ask, what happened to those guys who went looking? And when they did, when the story stirred again, she'd smile. Because every retelling gave her more space to move. Casey reached into his coat and pulled out something Jonah hadn't seen in weeks. The cracked phone they'd used to record their earliest conversations. The screen was splintered, the battery barely holding charge. But the storage was still intact. You kept it, Jonah asked. I thought we might need to remember, Casey said. But now, I'm not so sure. Jonah leaned back. Memory's a door. Every time you open it, you risk letting her through. Casey held the phone between his palms. We recorded everything. The Bellamy house. The tapes. The stitched girl. All of it's still on here. Jonah tensed. And if someone finds it, then they find her. Casey didn't wait for permission. He slid the phone from its case, opened the settings, and began deleting each file. Not with hesitation. With intent. Like someone pulling weeds. One by one, every clip, every photo, every saved voice memo vanished. A month's worth of evidence gone in seconds. When he was done, he didn't breathe a sigh of relief. He just stared at the blank screen. She's still with us, Jonah said quietly. I know. Even without the recordings. I know. Jonah reached across the table and slid the phone closer. Then, without breaking eye contact, he snapped it in half. Casey didn't flinch. Just nodded. She started with stories, Jonah said. But stories need storytellers. If we don't give her a voice, maybe she fades. Casey looked out the window. Or maybe she waits for someone else to start talking. They drove again. Another town. Another night in another faceless motel. Jonah lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the old AC unit and the occasional car passing by on the road. Everything felt too normal. That was the worst part. There was no dramatic haunting, no shadows moving across the walls, no whispers in the corners. Just the heavy quiet that came when you knew the storm wasn't over. It had just moved somewhere else. Sometime past midnight, he woke with a start. Not from a nightmare, from nothing. The kind of nothing that felt like something had just left the room. He sat up. The room was dark, except for the thin strip of light under the bathroom door. The air was cold, but the AC wasn't running. He stood slowly, feet silent on the carpet, and walked toward the bathroom. He didn't call for Casey, though the other bed looked undisturbed. The stillness felt deliberate. He opened the bathroom door and stopped. The mirror was gone, not shattered, not covered, gone, as if it had never been there. He turned. Casey stood in the doorway behind him, face pale. You didn't take it, Jonah asked. Casey shook his head. I thought you did. They both stared at the blank wall, heartbeats matching pace. Then Casey whispered, she's rewriting again. Jonah's skin went cold. Not just the story. Casey met his gaze. She's rewriting the world. The motel door opened slowly behind them. No wind, no footsteps. Just the soft creak of hinges and the stretch of silence that followed. They didn't turn around. Because they already knew what was there. Not the hollow. Not the stitched girl. Just a space waiting to be filled. The next version. The next story. And in that space, the faintest whisper, "Do you remember me yet?" Jonah didn't answer. Neither did Casey. They stood very still, holding the silence between them like a secret. Because sometimes silence is all you have left before the story begins again. They left the motel before sunrise, their footsteps hushed, not by intention, but by some instinct neither of them questioned anymore. Jonah didn't speak for the first hour of the drive. The road was empty, endless, a ribbon of cracked asphalt stretching through silence. Casey drove like a man expecting the road to fall out from under him at any moment. In truth, it already had. Because the moment the mirror disappeared from the motel bathroom, without sound, without damage, they both knew the rules had shifted again. The hollow no longer needed to appear. She could simply remove herself. And what's worse, she could remove anything. It wasn't just about reflections now. It was about existence. "She's erasing context," Jonah muttered finally, his voice raw from Dessous. Casey glanced at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, she's not just infecting people with stories anymore. She's wiping out the framework those stories rest on, removing mirrors, deleting tapes, erasing the origin points. Soon, there won't be a version of her anyone can trace. Just feel." Casey nodded slowly, gripping the wheel. "She's becoming pure memory. Detached, unverifiable." Jonah's jaw clenched. The version no one wrote. The one that lives in silence, that waits. The highway wound into a town too small to name. Most of the storefronts were boarded up, remnants of a place that had once tried to matter. They found a diner near a gas station and sat at a corner booth where the lights didn't quite reach. Jonah stared at the laminated menu without reading it. He wasn't hungry. He was counting. 3 days since they found the letters. 2 days since the tape. 1 day since the mirror vanished. Everything was speeding up now, not in action, but in decay. The more they tried to contain her, the faster she slipped between the cracks. Every effort to understand her only gave her another shape to hide in. The waitress brought coffee without them asking. She didn't speak, didn't smile, just placed the mugs down and walked away, her footsteps quiet like dust. Jonah watched her disappear into the kitchen, then turned to Casey. "We need to stop looking for her." Casey frowned. "What?" "We've been chasing her trail, trying to pin down the rules, trying to figure out where she's going. But we're not ahead of her anymore. We're not even behind her." Casey leaned forward. "Then where are we?" Jonah swallowed. "Inside." The word hung there between them, heavier than anything either of them had said since the beginning. "She's not in the mirrors, or the tapes, or the letters. She's in us now," Jonah said, staring into his untouched coffee. "In the pauses, the decisions we don't make, the memories we second guess." Casey sat back, jaw clenched. "So what? You think we're her carriers now?" "I think we always were," Jonah said. "We just didn't realize she doesn't need to manifest to spread. She only needs us to remember. Or worse, to try and forget." Casey didn't argue. Didn't need to. They both heard it then. Not a voice. Not a noise. A shift. The ambient sound of the diner changed. Not stopped, but tilted. A barely perceptible detuning, like the world was half a step out of key. Jonah turned slowly and looked toward the window. The street outside was gone. Not empty, just gone. Replaced with blankness. Not black, not fog. Just an absence. A stretch of nothingness so complete that the diner might have been floating in it. Casey stood slowly. "This isn't real." "No," Jonah said, standing beside him. "It's memory pretending to be reality." They walked to the front door, and Jonah reached for the handle. "Wait," Casey said sharply. "If she's in here with us now, what happens when we open that door?" Jonah's hand hovered. "That's the point," he whispered. "We're not supposed to know." He pulled it open. Nothing rushed in. No scream, no wind. Just that same blankness, stretching in every direction. They stepped outside, and the ground felt solid, but different, like walking on paper that might tear if you pressed too hard. Around them, the buildings were outlines, suggestive shapes, like someone had tried to recall what a town looked like without ever having seen one. Details blurred at the edges, windows with no glass, doors with no knobs. She's showing us what the world looks like when memory becomes the only map, Jonah said. Casey stared at a stop sign that had no writing on it. Then where are we? In a version of the story that doesn't have rules, Jonah said. Just expectation. From behind them, the diner door creaked again. They turned. She stood there. Not the stitched girl, not Evelyn. Just her. No face. No voice. Just presence. A shape you couldn't see but could recognize, like a name on the tip of your tongue, or a melody you remember without hearing. She didn't move. She didn't need to. Because in this place, they were already part of her. Casey whispered, "Why show us this?" Jonah answered, even though no words were spoken aloud, because she wants us to know how it ends. And then, light. Not from the sky, from the inside. A bright, burning white that poured from Jonah's chest like memory catching fire. He screamed, but there was no sound. Casey reached for him, but his hands passed through air. The hollow watched. Smiled, not cruelly, not kindly, just inevitably. Because this was the version no one wrote. The one that lived in the silence between stories. And now, finally, it was being told. Jonah opened his eyes to the sound of dripping water. Slow, steady, like a leaky faucet in the dead of night. But he wasn't in a bathroom. He wasn't anywhere familiar. The sky above him was gray, not stormy but exhausted, and the ground beneath his body felt neither warm nor cold. Just absent, like the idea of ground had been removed and replaced with something that mimicked it. He sat up slowly, his breath fogging in air that wasn't cold. There were no buildings, no trees, no Casey. Just a sprawling nothingness in every direction, cut only by that rhythmic drip that didn't echo, didn't grow louder, didn't end. He stood, testing his balance. His legs felt heavy, like memory weighed down his bones. He looked at his hands. Still his, but something was missing, not physically, internally. As if someone had gone through him while he slept and stolen a handful of essential thoughts. The kind that hold your identity in place. He remembered fire, the photograph, the diner, the door, and then her, the hollow. Not as a figure, not even as an idea, but as recognition. He turned around and saw it, a mirror. Free, standing, flawless, hovering inches off the ground. It wasn't framed. There was no reflection in the glass. No image, just surface, waiting. He approached slowly, expecting to see her, or himself, or nothing. But when he reached out and placed his palm against it, the mirror sank inward, like water, absorbing the shape of his hand without resistance. And then he heard the voice, not spoken aloud, not whispered, not heard in the ears, thought by someone else, inside his skull. "You never told the truth." Jonah staggered back. What? Another ripple in the air, this time not in sound but in memory. A memory he hadn't known existed. Him, as a child staring into a broken bathroom mirror while someone sobbed in the next room. No one had ever mentioned that night again. He'd buried it so deep it became fiction. But she hadn't. The hollow remembered. And now, she was sharing. Another image, his first night at Bellamy. The moment he saw her in the cracked hallway glass. But this time, he wasn't afraid. He was curious. The original version of the story had changed. He wasn't hunted. He followed her. "Why are you showing me this?" he said aloud, his voice cracking in the open space. The mirror didn't answer. But something behind it moved. Casey. Wearing the same clothes, looking the same. But not. His eyes were wrong. His expression was slack, neutral, like a puppet between performances. He stepped forward, hands loose at his sides. "Jonah," he said flatly. Jonah didn't respond. This wasn't Casey. It was a shape like Casey, built from fragments. "You brought her," the shape said. Jonah shook his head. "No, she followed us. The shape tilted its head. She didn't follow. She waited. She only needed you to speak her again. Another voice joined, his own. You never told the truth. The phrase repeated, echoing around him now, layering over itself like 1,000 overlapping mouths. Jonah clutched his head, trying to block it out, but the voices weren't outside. They were in him. Words he'd never said aloud, thoughts he'd tried to forget. The hollow wasn't haunting places anymore. She was rebuilding people, one unspoken thought at a time. The fake Casey stepped forward again. She's not behind glass anymore. She's behind you. Jonah spun, and there she was. Not in form, in presence. A feeling like pressure behind the eyes. The weight of something standing directly behind you when you're alone. Not visible, not touchable, but undeniable. He didn't dare move. Didn't speak. He just listened. To the sound of her smile. Because that's what it was now. Soundless, formless intent. She was no longer interested in being seen. She only wanted to be known. And once you knew her, truly knew her, she didn't leave. She replaced you. Jonah felt it start. Not pain, not even fear, just absence. Like a part of him was being unthreaded slowly, carefully, so he wouldn't notice what was missing until it was gone. A childhood memory, a song he used to hum, the smell of his mother's hair, tiny pieces, vanishing one after the other. He reached for them mentally, desperately, but every grasp only reminded him of what he no longer had. And in that emptiness, she planted something new, something that smiled before the fear. A version of him that remembered her first, a version without edges. Casey's voice, real this time, pierced the haze.
Jonah!
He turned. The real Casey was there, half formed through the fog, reaching. His face was contorted with fear, sweat on his brow, breath ragged. Don't listen, he shouted. The mirror cracked. Not shattered, cracked. A single hairline split across the surface. The fake Casey flickered. Jonah stumbled toward the sound of the voice. The fog clawed at him, slowing his legs, pulling at his ribs. His name echoed again, this time from both Caseys. Jonah. One voice was calm. The other was desperate. He chose the desperate one. He ran. And behind him, the mirror let out a soundless scream as it split open like paper under fire. Jonah fell forward and woke on the floor of the motel room, gasping, coughing, lungs burning. Casey was kneeling beside him, shaking his shoulders. You stopped breathing, Casey said, voice cracking. Jonah sat up, eyes wide, drenched in sweat. She almost replaced me. Casey helped him up. She's not done. Jonah nodded, shaking. We're at the end. No, Casey said quietly. We're past it. Jonah looked at him, and for a moment, wasn't sure if he was real. But the fear in Casey's eyes was too raw, too honest, to be fiction. She wasn't trying to be remembered anymore. She was rewriting the beginning. And no one would know how the story used to start, because there would only be her, smiling, before the fear. The world didn't end when Jonah opened his eyes that morning. It had already ended the night before, and they were simply living in its reflection. That's how it felt now. Like everything they walked through, every mile of cracked pavement and skyless dawn, was just an echo of something that had once been real. The air smelled like memory. The ground felt borrowed. And behind everything, just outside the edges of thought, was her. Always her. Jonah sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at his hands. He could still move them. Still feel the fabric of his shirt, the pressure of his knees. But it felt more like permission than sensation. Like something had allowed him to wake up, to get dressed, to be. And that permission could be revoked at any moment. Casey paced near the window, pulling the curtain back every few minutes just to confirm the outside world still existed. It did, technically, but something was off. No birds. No wind. The clouds didn't move. It was as if time itself had agreed to stall, just long enough for the hollow to finish whatever she had begun. Jonah finally spoke. This is the last part of the story. Casey turned surprised. You think she's done? Jonah shook his head. I think we are. He stood and walked to the mirror. the only one left in the room. Every other place they'd stayed, it had vanished by morning. But this one had stayed. Not because she couldn't take it, because she wanted it there. Jonah reached out, hand trembling slightly, and touched the glass. His reflection stared back at him. But his eyes were wrong. He stepped back. Casey moved beside him, staring at the same mirror, and froze, because he saw it too. The reflection didn't move in sync. It was delayed by a heartbeat, then two, then three, and then it stopped mimicking altogether. Jonah and Casey remained still, but the reflection smiled, that same subtle, curling expression they'd seen so many times now. On Evelyn, on the girl in the park, on the stitched face, it was her signature, soft, knowing, patient. She's not going to pull us in, Jonah said. She wants us to watch. Casey's voice was quiet. Watch what? The ending. The mirror shimmered, and the reflections began to move again, but not as duplicates. As versions, different clothes, different places. One version of Jonah stood outside the Bellamy house, flashlight in hand. Another sat beside Evelyn on a hospital bed. Another walked through the woods, camera rolling, whispering the name they'd all been told never to say. Casey saw himself, too. The night he first found the forum thread. The day he called Jonah. The basement of the abandoned church where they'd found the journal covered in red ink. Dozens of versions. Hundreds. And in every single one, the smile waited. She let us think we were hunting her, Jonah whispered. But it was the other way around. She wrote us, Casey said. We were part of the script. The reflections flickered, collapsed, and in their place, the mirror displayed a page. A single page. Handwritten in ink so dark it looked burned onto the glass. The story never ends because the story never begins. She waits in the space before the first word. She is not summoned. She is not escaped. She is only ever told. Jonah stepped closer. The writing shifted, moving like oil on water. Another line surfaced. Do not remember her. He swallowed hard. It's too late for that. The motel room shook. Not violently. Just enough to be felt. Casey looked around. She's not going to let us leave this time. No, Jonah agreed. She's going to keep us. The light in the room dimmed. Not like a bulb dying, but like a curtain drawing across reality itself. The mirror rippled again. This time, a face emerged, hers, but no details, no eyes, no nose, no stitched lips, just the feeling of a face. An outline drawn from the fear of every person who'd ever imagined her. She stared through them, not at them. And then, she spoke. Not aloud, not in their minds, but in the walls, the ceiling, the air. You were always telling me. Jonah stumbled back. Casey grabbed his arm, holding him upright. The walls began to crack, not physically, but conceptually. They could feel the edges of the room giving way. The idea of structure, of shelter, peeled apart like paper soaked in water. What do we do? Casey asked, desperation creeping into his voice. Jonah turned, heart pounding. We end the story. Casey blinked. What? We stop telling it. No last thoughts. No final warnings. No goodbyes. We just stop. The hollow smiled wider. She knew. Jonah reached for the mirror, fingers shaking. It didn't feel like glass anymore. It felt like memory. He looked to Casey. Are you with me? Casey hesitated, then nodded. Together, they pressed their palms against the mirror. It resisted, pushed back like breath held underwater. Then, slowly, it began to fade. Their reflections vanished, her face blurred, and the glass went blank. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, there was silence, real silence, not the kind that waits, not the kind that listens, just silence. Jonah dropped to his knees. Casey fell beside him, both of them breathing, still alive, still whole. But the story was gone. The hollow didn't scream. She didn't return. Because she didn't need to. They had chosen not to carry her anymore. And in that choice, she had no place left to live. Outside, the wind picked up. Birds returned to the sky. And the motel room slowly brightened, as if the world had remembered how to exist again. Jonah didn't look in the mirror. Casey didn't speak. They simply stood, opened the door, and walked out. No music, no warning, just the end. And the hollow, for now, remained where she belonged, untold, unspoken, unremembered, but always waiting, just before the next story begins. The end.